My daughter and I attended the wedding of my ex-husband and the homewrecker who ruined my marriage. I humiliated them, including my former mother-in-law who used to always insult me. Before we get into the story, let's do a roll call by subscribing, liking, and commenting below. Okay, let's begin. The sky above the densely packed suburban neighborhood was slowly being painted by the twilight brush, blending orange, red, and soft purple across the horizon, marking the transition of a tired day into the silence of the night. In the distance, the faint sound of evening church bells echoed from a few blocks away, inviting everyone to pause for a moment. Smoke billowed from the neighborhood kitchens, carrying the aroma of sautéed garlic and fried chicken mixed with the street dust, just stepped on by the exhausted shoes of people coming home from work. Behind those walls, there was a different story in every window. There was the cheerful laughter of a family just gathering. There were minor arguments about a child's homework. There was also a long, drawn-out silence of waiting. At the end of a narrow street barely wide enough for a single car to pass, stood a small, cream-colored rental house with peeling paint. Its iron fence was rusting in several places, and a potted snake plant that was almost wilting became the only decoration on the porch. However, from inside the house, a constant rhythm ticked like a tireless heart. The sound of a sewing machine echoed through the open window, reflecting the slightly flickering light of a 20-watt fluorescent bulb. There she was, Clara, a 8-year-old woman, the center of that rhythmic pulse. Her face, which was actually still very young, was veiled by an aura of earnestness that made her look more mature. Her calm eyes were fixed on the path of the fast-moving needle, dancing over a piece of ocean blue cotton fabric. On her lap lay several other pieces of fabric, a purple shawl, maroon lace material ordered by a neighbor, and leftover colorful scraps that she would later magically transform into something new. Sweat beaded on her temples, dampening the fine hair tucked behind her ears. The air inside the house was stuffy, untouched by the evening breeze. A small fan in the corner of the room just spun wearily, blowing the same hot air. But Clara's hands didn't falter. Her gentle but calloused fingers, marked by needle pricks and the tips of scissors, continued to guide the fabric with precision. She pressed the pedal of the old sewing machine with a steady rhythm. It was a daily lullaby she knew by heart. Then, amidst the ticking of the machine, emerged another voice, softer, more alive. "Mom, look, Mia, the doll has a new dress." Clara lifted her gaze to the floor. On a faded plastic mat sat a 5-year-old little girl with wide, sparkling eyes. That was Lily, her only daughter. In her hands was a simple rag doll. It was also Clara's creation from leftover scraps, now wearing a new outfit made from a small handkerchief tied with a yarn ribbon. The hum of the sewing machine stopped for a moment. Clara smiled. Not a forced smile, but a smile that came from the deepest place in her heart, an oasis in the midst of exhaustion. Her strong face instantly melted into immense softness. "So beautiful, sweetie," she said. Her voice was slightly hoarse because she hadn't spoken much all day. "Lily is so smart. You already know how to decorate dolls. Later, when Lily grows up, you can help Mom sew real clothes, right?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. Her smile widened, showing her incomplete baby teeth. "Yes, Mom. Lily will sew clothes for Mom later." Then, with innocent pureness, she let out a small laugh. That laughter was clear and light, like the chime of a small bell chasing away the silence. It was the most beautiful music to Clara. It filled every corner of their simple house, which might have been poor in wealth, but rich in priceless warmth. However, that warmth was now beginning to leave a pinch of emptiness. Clara sighed, and her gaze shifted to the wooden wall clock hanging on the wall. The long hand steadily pointed to 12, while the short hand was exactly on the 6. 6 o'clock in the evening. Reflexively, her ears filtered the sounds from outside. She expected a specific noise, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway followed by heavy footsteps or the jingle of keys finding the keyhole. That was David's routine, her husband, since the beginning. A coming home ritual she always looked forward to as a sign that the day was complete, that their family was whole. But this evening, the street was silent from that sound. Only the distant barking of a dog and the sound of a television from the house next door could be heard. Clara took a deep breath. She knew David was burdened. Brief conversations over the past few weeks always ended in complaints about office targets, increasingly competitive coworkers, and a demanding boss. Clara never added to that burden. She never asked for a new purse, never whined about going to the mall, let alone compared him to the neighbor's husband who had a brand new car. For Clara, her philosophy of life was simple. As long as they could still eat 3 meals a day with enough food, and Lily was healthy and could smile, that was more than enough. It was a blessing to be grateful for. Yet, behind that resignation, something was stirring within Clara's soul. A subtle instinct she often pinched into silence. Fear. Not fear of poverty, but fear of losing something abstract yet powerful. Warmth. She felt it slowly. The warmth that used to fill this small house-like chatter before bed, laughing together while watching sitcoms, even small debates about the dinner menu was starting to evaporate, replaced by a heavy silence, as if confirming her instincts. That night, David came home with sluggish steps. Clara, who had prepared a special homemade meatloaf with mashed potatoes, exactly the way David liked it, greeted him at the door with the most sincere smile she could muster. "Honey, you're home? Going straight to the shower?" "I made your favorite meatloaf," she said. Her soft voice tried to pierce the gloomy clouds on her husband's face. David only glanced briefly, tossed his briefcase onto the sofa with a tired motion, and headed straight to the dining table. He sat down, grabbed a plate, and started scooping the food without a word. His back was tense. Clara sat across from him, watching her husband's every move. The wrinkles on David's forehead looked deeper under the dim light. "Tired, honey?" she asked. Her voice was almost a whisper, as if afraid to disturb a concentration that wasn't actually there. David nodded without taking his eyes off his plate. "The usual. Lots of work," he muttered shortly, dismissively. There were 1,000 questions and a desire to share hanging on the tip of Clara's tongue. She wanted to tell him about the new order from Mrs. Jenkins, about Lily's cuteness that afternoon, or simply ask if his day had been hard. But she swallowed it all. Years of being with David had taught her one thing. He wasn't a man who liked being surrounded by words. Space and silence were his ways of recovering. Clara chose to respect that, even though the silence given felt colder and deeper than usual. After eating, David got up without helping to clear the plates. His steps headed to the bedroom, and shortly after, the sound of the evening news replaced the silence. Lily, who had just finished washing her hands, jogged over. "Daddy! Look at the flower Lily drew!" she exclaimed cheerfully, holding up a drawing paper with a scribble of a sunflower in scattered colors. David turned his head briefly. His eyes, which would normally sparkle at seeing his daughter, were now just blank. His hand reached out, patting Lily's head with a quick, flat motion. "Yeah, it's nice," he said blandly before turning his back again and lying down, staring at the ceiling. The light in Lily's eyes dimmed instantly. Her lips formed a small, broken smile. Clara immediately embraced her child, hugging her tightly. "It's okay, sweetie. Daddy is just very tired today. Let's keep the drawing, okay? Later, when Daddy is rested, he will look at it properly," she whispered in Lily's ear, holding back the tremble in her own voice. Lily nodded obediently and wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. She inhaled Clara's distinct scent, a mix of lotion, fabric, and an unfading love. The little girl was quiet, as if understanding far more than her age should allow. The night crept deeper. After Lily drifted off into dreams, Clara returned to the living room. She sat in front of her sewing machine, but this time, the needle was still. Her hands only stroked the surface of the unfinished ocean blue fabric. Her mind drifted far away. Piercing through the tunnel of time, she remembered the early days of her marriage to David. When this house still felt so spacious because it was filled only with love and dreams. David was a passionate young man. His eyes always sparkled when talking about the future. They married simply, without a glamorous reception. Their rings were just plain silver bands. But back then, David once held Clara's hands and said with a voice full of conviction, "The important thing is our intentions and our hearts are pure, honey. The money will follow." Those words once made Clara cry tears of joy, convinced she had found the anchor for her heart. Now, In the midst of the silent night, those words felt like a faint echo from the past, almost like a fairy tale believed by a woman who was too naive. Back then, David was an enthusiastic and attentive man. They married with full love despite having no grand party. Their rings were simple, but David used to say, "The important thing is our intentions, and our hearts are pure, honey." Those words used to make Clara weep with emotion, but now they felt like a blurred shadow of the past. Clara looked down, taking a deep breath. She tried to strengthen herself. Life isn't always as expected, but she believed that sincerity would eventually yield something. The next morning, sunlight pierced the worn curtains. Clara had woken up earlier. She prepared breakfast and laid out David's work clothes. Though often ignored, she still tried to be a good wife. David came out of the bedroom with slightly messy hair. "Breakfast," he said flatly. Clara smiled. David sat down without speaking, grabbed a plate, and ate quickly. Clara watched, but she didn't want to ask anything that would make the atmosphere tense. Before leaving for work, David briefly looked at Lily, who was humming a little tune. The child waved, saying, "Bye, Daddy, be careful." David gave a small smile, a smile that was becoming rare. After the door closed, Clara looked around the house. She then patted her chest softly. "We have to be strong, Clara," she muttered to herself. Days went by like that. Clara continued to work hard sewing, taking orders from neighbors and small clients. Although the income wasn't much, she was always grateful. That afternoon, her neighbor, Linda, came bringing fabric. "Clara, I want to order 2 custom maxi dresses for my daughter." "Oh, and if possible, finish it in a week," she said. Clara smiled warmly. "I'll do my best, Linda. I'll try to get it done quickly." Linda looked around Clara's house. "You are so hard-working, honey. If only your husband could help promote it, you'd move up fast." Clara just gave a thin smile. "Yes, Linda. Just taking it slow. Money will find its way." Linda nodded and said goodbye. After the woman left, Clara stared at the fabric on the table. She stroked it slowly as if talking to it. "You know, Lily, sometimes Mom gets tired, but when I remember you, it feels like all my energy comes back." Lily looked up from the small chair where she was drawing. "Mom, later when Lily grows up, Lily wants to buy Mom a really big house." Clara chuckled while looking at that tiny face. "Amen. But for now, help Mom out, okay? Get the scissors from the drawer." The days felt slow but full of meaning. However, behind that simple warmth, something had changed in David's heart. He began to feel his life was too ordinary. He felt tired of the unchanging simplicity. At the office, his colleagues often talked about their modern wives, having lunch at fancy cafes, or taking weekend trips out of state. David could only smile hollowly, covering up the inferiority in his heart. "Dave, where does your wife work now?" asked one of his office friends, Mark. "At home, just doing some sewing and tailoring stuff," David answered shortly. "Oh, no wonder you're so thrifty, huh? You never treat us to drinks at the end of the month," joked another. David laughed hollowly, but his chest burned. When he came home and saw Clara in front of the sewing machine, that feeling of shame surfaced again, even though Clara had done absolutely nothing wrong. One night, Clara excitedly showed him the results of her sewing. "Honey, look, I got a lot of orders. Next week, hopefully, I can buy an extra sewing machine." David just glanced at it. Sew, and sew. "Don't you ever get bored?" Clara fell silent. "No, honey, I like it. Besides, this helps our finances too." David stood up. The tone of his voice began to sharpen. "I work hard every day and get exhausted. I come home wanting to rest. But you keep talking about work. I just want some peace, Clara." Clara looked down, not arguing. "I'm sorry, honey. I just wanted to share the good news. Whatever. I want to sleep," he snapped, then went into the bedroom. Clara's tears fell without her being able to stop them. She sat in the chair, staring at the unfinished fabric. That night, the sound of the sewing machine was no longer heard. The next morning, Clara woke up earlier than usual. She prepared breakfast and looked at her husband's face, which had been silent since last night. She wanted to apologize, but somehow, the words seemed caught in her throat. Honey, I made some toast. Want to try? She asked softly. David only answered flatly, no need. I'll grab something outside. Clara stared at her husband's retreating back. It felt like there was a widening distance between them. She tried to smile, but the smile wavered. Time kept moving forward. Lily grew up cheerfully in the midst of that small house. Whenever her mother looked sad, she always tried to make Clara laugh. Sometimes with a little song, sometimes by drawing her mother's face on paper with the words, Supermom. Clara taped the drawing to the wall. Every time she felt tired, she looked at it and regained her spirit. However, without Clara realizing it, out there, David was drifting further away. He started coming home late frequently, looked at his phone more often while smiling to himself, and made excuses about working overtime. Clara tried to trust him because love made her blind to the things that were slowly changing. She only knew one thing. She loved her family with all her heart, even though her life was far from perfect. That night, while putting her to bed, Lily whispered softly, As long as Mom is here, Lily will never lack love. We have to be strong, sweetie, Clara whispered back. And from behind the bedroom curtains, the dim light illuminated Clara's calm face, yet harboring an unseen sorrow. A loud knock on the door rang out that afternoon. Clara, who was hanging up the laundry, rushed to the front, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Once the door opened, the face of a middle-aged woman with neat makeup and sparkling jewelry was already standing in the doorway with a sharp gaze. Hello. Her voice was flat but piercingly sharp. Clara immediately smiled warmly. Hello, Margaret. Please come in. Margaret stepped inside without replying. Her eyes swept over the entire contents of the house. Her gaze stopped at the small rug that was a bit worn, then at the wooden chairs whose color was starting to fade. Still looks exactly like this, huh? She said, with a half-mocking tone. Clara held her breath, trying to smile. Yes, Margaret. We haven't had the chance to replace them. Later, if we get the money, we will fix it up. Margaret sat down arrogantly, patting her clothes so they wouldn't get dusty. Money, money, money. Everyone says that. But if you just keep talking about money without effort, your life will just stay like this. Clara looked down. She knew where this conversation was going. She knew every time her mother-in-law visited, it would always end in sentences that offended her feelings. But this time, she still tried to be patient. David works hard, Margaret, she replied softly. I also help out from home. Sewing orders for the neighbors. Margaret snorted. Shh. You think sewing people's clothes will make your life prosperous? I really wonder why David couldn't get a woman who could help him advance. Look at Jessica, my friend's daughter. She's beautiful, works at a bank, makes a huge salary. If he had a wife like that, David would have been able to buy a house in a gated community by now. Those words felt like a knife, slowly entering Clara's chest. But she still gave a thin smile, even though her face began to tense. Everyone has their own path to success, Margaret, she said with a trembling yet soft voice. Margaret instead looked her up and down. You are too passive. That's why your life never moves forward. You're too lazy to even dress up. Hair all messy like that. I'd be embarrassed if the neighbors saw you. They'd think my daughter-in-law is neglected. Clara looked down. The hands that were holding the fabric suddenly trembled. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears starting to pool in her eyes. From the bedroom, a small voice was heard. Mom, Lily is thirsty, called Lily with a soft voice. Clara immediately stood up. Excuse me for a moment, Margaret. She walked to the bedroom, fetching a water bottle for her daughter. But as soon as she was inside the room, she paused for a moment. She wiped her eyes gently, so they wouldn't look red. Lily looked at her mother and asked innocently, Mom, what's wrong? Your eyes are red. Clara smiled, hugging the little girl. It's nothing, sweetie. Just got some dust in my eye. Lily nodded slightly, then went back to playing with her doll. Clara took a long breath and returned to the living room. She brought a mug of hot tea she had just made. Here, Margaret, the tea is still hot. Margaret looked at the mug for a moment, then said, Just this mug, huh? Don't you get bored? Let me give you some advice. You need to learn how to manage a house so it looks decent. Don't let it look like a cheap motel room like this." Clara placed the mug on the table slowly. She didn't reply anymore. She just stared blankly at the floor, letting those sharp words pass by. In her heart, it stung. It wasn't that she didn't want to fix up the house, not that she didn't want to look more presentable in her mother-in-law's eyes, but how could her income from sewing only be enough for food and a little savings? David's salary was barely making ends meet. Clara looked at the wall clock, hoping time would pass quickly so her mother-in-law would go home soon. However, Margaret wasn't finished. "You have to be able to make David feel at home. Just look, he comes home late every day. Don't be surprised if he gets bored seeing you like this all the time," she said with a cynical smile. That sentence pierced deeper than the rest. Clara gripped her long skirt tightly. "I am trying, Margaret. I cook his favorite meals. I prepare his clothes. I do everything. Even so, if a man gets bored, he can run to another woman. I'm just telling you, don't end up regretting it later." Clara looked down even deeper. She didn't know how to answer anymore. When Margaret finally stood up to leave, Clara walked her to the front. "Drive safe, Margaret." Margaret only glanced back and said coldly, "Next time I come, please tidy up the house a bit. It's an eyesore." Once the door closed, Clara immediately sat on the floor. Her eyes stared blankly. Then slowly, her tears fell. She clasped her own hands, trying to hold back her sobs. That evening, David came home. His face looked exhausted. Clara was still sitting in front of the sewing machine, pretending to be busy so her husband wouldn't notice her sadness. "Honey, your mom came by earlier," she said carefully. David only responded briefly. "Oh yeah? What did she say?" "Nothing. Just giving advice like usual," replied Clara with a forced smile. David took a long sigh. "Whatever, don't be too sensitive. You know how my mom is. Sometimes she speaks harshly." "Honey," Clara's voice dropped, "but I never talk back. I just want peace at home." David looked at her for a moment, then stood up. "You overthink too much. Just don't take it to heart. Mom says those things because she cares." Clara remained silent. She knew discussing this would only make her husband uncomfortable. In her heart, she tried to understand. Maybe it was true that David wanted her to be better, but his methods were too painful. Day after day, the situation repeated itself. Every week, Margaret came with sharp comments, sometimes about the house, sometimes about Clara's appearance, sometimes about Lily, who was considered too skinny. "Why is your child so skinny? What do you feed her? Look at Brenda's kid, plump and healthy. You need to learn how to be a proper mother." Clara looked down, hugging Lily, who was standing beside her. "Lily is healthy, Margaret. The doctor also said her weight is normal." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Ah, you just like making excuses. No wonder David often complains to me. He says you're stubborn." Clara's heart felt like it was being squeezed. She didn't know if it was true that David said that, but if he did, it meant her husband was starting to expose their marital flaws to others. After Margaret went home, Clara sat on the porch for a long time. Lily hugged her mother's legs, looking at Clara's face that appeared blank. "Mom, why is Grandma always mad at Mom?" asked Lily innocently. That question made Clara choke up. She looked down, kissing her child's head. "Grandma isn't mad, sweetie. Grandma just likes to speak a little loudly." Lily hugged her mother tighter. "Lily loves Mom. Mom is good." That simple sentence was enough to stop Clara's tears from falling again. She looked at the evening sky, saying in her heart, "If only my mother-in-law knew, I never hated her. I just want to be accepted as I am." A few days later, while Clara was preparing dinner, a car stopped in front of the house. She knew who was coming. "Margaret again," she muttered softly. She wiped the flour off her hands and quickly opened the door. This time, Margaret came carrying plastic grocery bags filled with fruit and some children's clothes. "This is for Lily. Poor thing. Her clothes are all outgrown," she said, placing the bags on the table. Clara thanked her sincerely. "Thank you, Margaret. Lily will be very happy." However, before Clara could finish her sentence, Margaret opened her mouth again. But really, Clara, when you take care of your child, don't do it half-heartedly. Look at your child. Her hair is long and untidy. Her clothes are shabby. Aren't you embarrassed? Clara bit her own lip, looking down. I brushed it, Margaret. But Lily was playing outside. Your excuses are too casual. A woman should be able to make her family look respectable. If you keep this up, don't blame anyone if your husband finds someone else. This time, Clara's chest felt tight, but she kept holding herself back. Not a single word came out. She knew that responding would only make things worse. When David came home that night, Margaret immediately welcomed him in the living room. Dave, I told you, you need to help your wife learn how to be a proper wife. If not, you're going to suffer. David laughed a little, looking at his mother. Yeah, Mom, Clara is still learning, taking it slow. However, when Margaret had gone home, the atmosphere was silent. David sat on the sofa, staring at his wife, who was busy clearing the table. Why do you always look so tense every time my mom comes? He asked. Clara paused for a moment. I'm just afraid of making a mistake, honey. Afraid of making her dislike me, David sighed. You're too emotional. Mom just tells it like it is. You should be grateful someone is still willing to give you advice. Clara didn't answer. She just stared at the empty dining table, letting the silence fill the room. That night, after everyone was asleep, Clara went out to the porch. The night breeze blew gently, but her heart was cold and heavy. She sat hugging her knees, looking at the starry sky. In the silence, her tears finally fell. She didn't hate anyone. She didn't want to retaliate against anyone. She just wanted to be understood, even just a little. But it seemed like no one really wanted to see the small wounds she hid behind her gentle smile. Ever since David told her that there was a new employee at his office named Chloe, Clara actually felt happy. She thought at least David now had a coworker who could help him so he wouldn't be too overwhelmed with office work. Clara, who was innocent, never harbored the slightest suspicion. Her name is Chloe. She just transferred from the out-of-state branch, David said one night while unbuttoning his shirt. Oh, so an office friend, huh? That's great if you have a coworker who can help, Clara said while preparing hot tea on the table. David just gave a small nod, then sipped the tea without saying much. Since then, Chloe's name was mentioned several times by David in their casual chats at home. Clara listened without suspicion, instead feeling proud because David seemed increasingly enthusiastic about working. Chloe is super hardworking, Clara. If she's asked to work overtime, she never refuses, David said while looking at his phone screen. Clara smiled gently. Wow, that's impressive. Modern women are amazing. But you must also take care of your health. Don't work overtime too often. It's just the job, honey. If we don't meet targets, we'll fall behind, David answered simply. A few days later, Clara began to notice something odd. David came home late more and more frequently, sometimes at 9 p.m., sometimes 10 p.m. She even waited up past midnight once. She was worried, afraid something had happened to her husband on the road. But every time David came home, the excuse was always the same: piling work, sudden meetings, unfinished reports. That night, Clara was still sitting on the wooden chair in front of the house, rocking Lily to sleep on her lap. The porch light was dim, the sound of crickets faintly heard. Clara stared at the dark, quiet street, waiting for the sound of footsteps or David's car. But until the clock struck past 11, there was no sign of her husband returning. When David's car finally pulled up in front of the house, Clara hurriedly stood up. Working late again, honey? She asked softly. David sighed and placed his bag on the chair. Yeah, Clara, there's so much office work. You shouldn't wait up. Just go to sleep. I was just worried, Clara replied softly, looking at her husband's tired face. Have you eaten? Yeah. At the office earlier, Chloe bought some takeout. She said so I wouldn't get sick from working late so much. Clara smiled sincerely. That was very nice of her. Yeah. David just nodded while changing his clothes. Unaware that behind that gentle smile, Clara's heart trembled slightly, not out of jealousy, but because of a small premonition that emerged without her fully understanding it. Days passed, and Clara began to feel a distance, slowly growing between them. David was more often busy with his phone, smiling a little when a message came in. Clara noticed but never asked. She was afraid of being considered suspicious, afraid of being accused of not trusting him. Lily, still young, often asked innocently, "Mom, why doesn't Daddy play with Lily anymore?" That question was like a small thorn piercing Clara's heart. She could only answer gently, "Daddy is working, sweetie, so Lily can go to a good college later." The next morning, Clara prepared breakfast as usual. Simple toast, scrambled eggs, and the hot sauce David liked. But this time David seemed to be in a rush. "Sorry, Clara, I don't have time to eat." "Morning meeting," he said while grabbing his bag. "Just eat for a minute, honey." "I've been cooking since dawn," Clara said, trying to hold back the sadness in her tone. "Later, I promise," David answered quickly and left. After David left, Clara sat at the dining table looking at the 2 plates of food still steaming. She looked at their wedding photo hanging on the wall. David's face and hers, once so happy with smiles full of hope. Now, for some reason, that smile felt far away. That afternoon, Clara heard news from a neighbor who happened to work in the same building as David. "Clara, I saw David at the cafe with a coworker earlier. They seemed really close." "A female friend," the neighbor half whispered. "Oh, yes, probably an office friend," Clara answered, trying to stay calm even though her chest was beating faster. That night, Clara tried to ask carefully, "Honey, I heard you often eat with Chloe at the office." David looked at her slightly surprised, but quickly masked his facial expression. "Well, yeah, it's normal. We're on the same team. So eating together is a normal thing. Don't think weird things, Clara." Clara smiled gently. "I'm not thinking anything, just asking." "But the way you ask is like someone who's suspicious," David fired back, his tone rising. Clara fell silent. She didn't want to drag it out. "I'm sorry if I said the wrong thing. I just miss you." After that conversation, David kept his distance even more. He came home later and later. Once, he didn't even come home all night. His excuse was a business trip. But Clara knew the money in his wallet didn't increase, and his work clothes didn't look wrinkled like they would after a long meeting. However, even though her heart began to fill with question marks, Clara still tried to cover it with prayers. In the quiet night, after putting Lily to sleep, Clara sat in front of her sewing machine. Her fingers moved slowly, sewing custom dresses for the neighborhood ladies. Amidst the hum of the sewing machine, her tears fell without her realizing it. She didn't know what was changing in her life. All she knew was that the love that was once warm now felt cold and distant. David might no longer see her small struggles, but Clara still hoped that one day her husband would realize that behind their simple house, there was a great love she maintained with tears, sincerity, and endless prayers. However, slowly, the truth began to show its true face. Chloe was not just an ordinary coworker. She began to appear in every crack of Clara's life, even without the wife realizing it, who still placed full trust in her husband. And that was where the massive storm began to lurk, slowly but surely. Changes in David's attitude became more noticeable day by day. Previously, every time he came home from work, David would always greet Lily, who ran up to him, hugging her father's legs while laughing cheerfully. Now, the sound of that laughter was increasingly rare in their small home. "Daddy?" "Lily drew a flower for Daddy at school," Lily said one afternoon, her small hands holding a colorful piece of paper. David, who was sitting, arranging his phone in the living room chair, only glanced briefly. "Yeah, nice," he answered flatly without really looking. "Daddy, please look," Lily exclaimed again, hoping for praise like before. "Clara, please tell Lily not to bother me right now." "Daddy is tired," David said, taking a long sigh and walking into the bedroom. Lily stood frozen in place, her eyes beginning to well up. Clara hugged her daughter gently. "Later, when Daddy isn't tired anymore, Daddy will look at it, okay? Now let's put the drawing away." She smiled, but her eyes began to water. She knew what had changed wasn't because of exhaustion, but because David's heart was now pulling away. That night, Clara stared at her husband's back, facing away from her in bed. Usually, they still had light conversations before sleeping. About Lily, about sewing orders, or just small jokes that made their house feel warm. But now there was only a silence that pressed on her chest. "Honey," Clara called softly. Why have you been so gloomy lately? If there's something making you upset, I apologize." David took a deep sigh. "I'm tired, Clara. Don't keep asking questions. But you rarely talk to me anymore. I just want to know you're okay." David turned around with an annoyed face. "Clara, I need peace. Don't interfere too much in my office affairs. I work for us, for Lily. Don't add to the burden." Those words slapped Clara's feelings. She fell silent, then stared at the bedroom ceiling. Her tears fell soundlessly. Early the next morning, Margaret came again without notice. "Clara!" she called out loudly while knocking on the door. Clara rushed out of the kitchen, wiping her wet hands. "Yes, Margaret. What is it? Make some coffee, okay? I want to talk." Clara nodded, prepared coffee in the kitchen, and then sat politely in front of her mother-in-law. Margaret looked around the small house with a displeased face. "Still cramped, huh? You've been married for years, but there's no change in this house. Poor David works his fingers to the bone, but there are no visible results." Clara looked down. "We are still trying, Margaret. Everyone's luck is different." "Luck is different, yes. But if a wife can be relied on, the husband will surely succeed. You only know how to sew. Look at the woman in David's office, Chloe. Her appearance is neat, she's smart, she knows how to support a husband." Clara was silent. That statement was like a knife, slowly piercing her chest. She knew her mother-in-law never really liked her, but this time her words felt even crueler. "Margaret, I may not be as pretty or as smart as other people, but I always try to make David comfortable. I also help earn money from my sewing," Clara replied softly but firmly. "Comfortable? You think a man can be comfortable living paycheck to paycheck forever? You can't make David proud in front of other people. Look at yourself, Clara. Looking like this. Pathetic." Clara couldn't hold back the tears that fell, but she quickly wiped them away. "I will try to be better, Margaret." Margaret only snorted cynically. "Effort won't yield results if fundamentally you aren't on the same level. I told David from the beginning he deserves someone classy, not you." After saying that, the woman stood up and left Clara with a broken heart. That night, Clara sat alone in the kitchen. Lily was asleep in her room, and the house was quiet, leaving only the ticking sound of the wall clock. She stared at the silent sewing machine, then looked down. "Oh God," she whispered softly. "If I am lacking, teach me how to improve myself, but don't let my family be destroyed." Her tears dripped onto the surface of the unfinished fabric. She bit her lip, trying to suppress her sobs so Lily wouldn't wake up. However, no matter how hard she tried to calm herself, her inner voice said, "Something is wrong." David increasingly took his phone into the bathroom, often locked the screen as soon as Clara approached. And every time he was asked, his answers were always short and flat. That afternoon, Clara was hanging up the laundry when she saw David talking in front of the house with someone. From a distance, she couldn't clearly see the face, but briefly, she saw long hair and neat clothes. It looked like a woman. When Clara approached, the woman hurriedly left, giving a small smile in David's direction. "Who was that, honey?" Clara asked softly. "Office friend," David answered quickly. "That looked like Chloe." David paused for a moment, then glared at Clara with an annoyed face. "Are you spying on me, Clara? I am really tired of your constantly suspicious attitude. No privacy at all." "I'm not suspicious, honey. I was just asking." "Well, stop asking questions," he snapped, then went inside the house and slammed the bedroom door hard. Lily, who heard the noise, came out of her room with a worried face. "Mom, Daddy's mad, huh?" Clara quickly reassured her. "No, sweetie, Daddy is just tired." But this time her voice was hoarse, holding back tears. She picked up Lily, hugging the little girl tightly while whispering. The night grew late. The wind from the window cracks brought a chill into the room. Clara lay beside Lily, looking at the shadow of the street lamp, piercing through the thin curtain. She heard the sound of David's footsteps in the living room. Whatever he was doing, Her heart began to be filled with increasingly massive question marks about love, about loyalty, and about how long she had to hold on. And in that silent night, amidst the tightness in her chest, Clara could only cry in silence. Her voice was caught in her throat, while her tears fell on the pillow one by one. She knew a massive storm was coming to strike the marriage she used to protect with boundless love and sacrifice. That afternoon, the air felt scorching hot. Even the leaves of the oak tree in Clara's front yard looked wilted, blown by the dry wind. Clara was hanging out her sewing work when her phone vibrated. A message came in from her old best friend, Rachel. "Clara, I don't know how to say this, but I just saw David at a cafe near his office. He's with a woman. I think it's Chloe." That message made Clara's hands tremble. She stared at the screen for a long time, as if hoping her eyes had misread it. However, the names displayed were clear: David and Chloe. Two names that lately had often caused anxiety in her chest. Clara looked toward the house where Lily was playing with her doll on the porch. Her heart beat fast, her chest felt tight. She wanted to dismiss the bad thoughts, but her premonition could no longer be ignored. That night, when David came home, Clara gathered the courage to ask. Her voice was gentle, but clearly trembling, suppressing the accumulating emotions. "Honey, I got word from Rachel today. She said she saw you at a cafe with Chloe. You guys had office business, right?" David, who was taking off his shoes, snapped his head around, his face tense. "Why are you asking that?" "I'm just asking, honey. So there's no misunderstanding. I know you're busy, but..." "So it means you don't trust me," David cut in with a raised voice. "It's not that, honey. Enough, Clara. I am so exhausted. Every day, I get questioned. Everything I do, you suspect. Do you think I think you're cheating, honey? I just wanted to know." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Clara said, looking down. "But you already dared to control my life. I work. I know what I'm doing. Don't meddle in office affairs. You just stay home, take care of the kid and your sewing machine." Clara fell silent. Every word that came out of her husband's mouth was like a knife slicing her heart, slowly but deeply. She just wanted clarification, but instead was deemed a controlling wife. The atmosphere in the house that night turned cold. Lily, who had stepped out of her room because she heard her father's voice, could only stand at the door. "Daddy is mad at Mom, huh?" she asked innocently. David only glanced at her briefly, then said flatly, "Go to your room, Lily." The little child obeyed, though her eyes showed fear. Clara stared at her husband's back as he went into the bedroom without another word. The next day, Margaret came again, but this time her face was sourer than usual. "I knew it. You definitely make David stressed," she said directly, without a greeting. Clara, who was feeding Lily, looked up in shock. "What's wrong, Margaret?" David told me. "He said you've been bossing him around, accusing him of cheating. Who do you think you are? A woman like you should be grateful you still have a husband like David." Clara tried to restrain herself. "I didn't accuse him, Margaret. I just asked nicely." "Asked nicely?" Margaret laughed cynically. "You are cunning, Clara. From the outside you look gentle, but inside you're full of suspicion. A woman like you makes my son's life miserable." Clara didn't reply. She just looked down, holding back tears that were ready to fall. But Margaret wasn't done. "If you can't make David happy, let him go. Don't hold back a man who could get a much better woman than you. You think David has to live poor like this for the rest of his life?" Those words pierced Clara's heart. She looked at the woman, trying to speak calmly. "Margaret, I may not be perfect, but I love David. I never want our marriage to be ruined." Margaret snorted. "Love? But you make my son suffer." "Enough, Clara. Know your place. David deserves to live with a woman who knows her worth, not you, who can only sew cheap fabric." Lily, who was sitting next to Clara, started to sob quietly hearing that loud voice. Clara immediately hugged her child, looking at her mother-in-law with teary eyes. "Margaret, please don't talk like that in front of my daughter," Clara said slowly. "Whatever, but one day you will know David will leave you, and when that time comes, don't blame anyone but yourself." Margaret left, slamming the door hard. Leaving a suffocating silence, Clara hugged Lily tightly. The child gripped her mother's hand tightly. "Mom, don't cry. Lily doesn't like seeing Mom sad." Clara forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, Mom is okay." But as soon as night fell and Lily was asleep, Clara could no longer hold back her tears. In the dark room that used to be full of warmth, there was now only silence and cold. She stared at a wedding photo hanging on the wall, the photo that was once the witness to their vows. "What did I do wrong, honey?" she whispered softly. "What is my fault that you can no longer see me as the wife I used to be?" David's phone lying on the table blinked. A message came in. The sender's name was clearly written, Chloe. Clara's heart dropped, but she restrained herself. She didn't dare open it, not wanting to commit the sin of invading privacy. But in her heart, the wound deepened. The following days passed in increasing tension. David started talking rarely. Even when he did, it was always brief, even cold. Clara tried to improve the mood by making David's favorite food, keeping the house neater, even writing little notes with sweet words that she slipped into her husband's work bag. But all of it was never reciprocated. One night, Clara heard David talking on the phone outside the house. His voice was low but could be heard clearly because the night was so quiet. "Yeah, I'll make time tomorrow, but don't go to the same cafe. People might see." Clara froze behind the bedroom door. Her breath hitched. She knew that sentence wasn't about work. She didn't dare to cry this time. She just stared at the ceiling and prayed in her heart, "Oh God, if this is indeed a test, give me strength. But if he truly has turned away, please give me a way to survive for Lily." And that night became the true beginning of the fracture. A crack that not only separated the hearts of husband and wife, but also slowly destroyed the hopes of a woman who only wanted to be loved sincerely. That night, the air felt bone-chillingly cold. The sky looked dark without stars, as if it too were grieving, witnessing the sluggish steps of a woman who had just lost everything. Clara walked while holding the small hand of Lily, who kept looking at her mother without a sound. In her left hand, 2 large suitcases dragged heavily on the concrete sidewalk in front of the nice suburban house that had just rejected her outright. "Leave quickly before I regret it," yelled Margaret from the porch, hands on her hips. Meanwhile, David stood behind his mother with a cold face, without the slightest ounce of guilt. Clara didn't answer. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Lily looked at her father with tear-filled eyes, but the man just averted his gaze, pretending to be busy lighting a cigarette. Clara's heart felt like it was being crushed. The husband who once promised to protect her was now throwing divorce words like throwing stones at her own face. All the sacrifices, loyalty, and love she nurtured, all this time, collapsed just like that. Their steps moved further away. Lily occasionally looked back to see the house that used to be her playground, now acting as if it never knew her. "Mom, where are we going?" The small voice sounded faint, barely audible over the sound of night crickets. "We're looking for a place to rest first, sweetie," Clara answered softly, holding back her tears from falling. "Daddy isn't coming?" Clara fell silent. It took a few seconds before she finally answered, "Daddy is busy right now, kiddo, but Mom is always here." They walked until they reached a bus stop near the downtown market. Clara set down her suitcases and then hugged Lily tightly. The night wind felt so cruel, but a mother's hug made the world stay warm for such a small child. In silence, Clara stared blankly ahead at the long road she knew would be the beginning of her new life story. In her heart, she promised, "One day, they will all regret ever kicking me out like this." The next day, Clara took shelter in a small rented apartment belonging to her best friend, Rachel, whom she used to help with sewing. Rachel was shocked to see Clara's condition, pale, exhausted, and with swollen eyes. "Clara, oh my God, what happened? How did it get to this?" Rachel immediately hugged her. "David. He divorced me," Clara answered softly. Rachel fell silent, then looked at Lily, who was asleep on her mother's lap. "He is so heartless." "You gave him everything, Clara. Why would he do this?" "Because he's been blinded by wealth and the seduction of another woman." "I don't want to cry anymore, Rachel. I just want to rise up." The following days passed slowly but surely. Clara began taking some sewing orders from the surrounding neighbors. Even though her rented apartment was cramped, the atmosphere was far more peaceful than the oppressive house from before. Every time the thread traced the fabric, her mind drifted to the past. When she still smiled, welcoming David home, cooking warm food, and hearing Lily's laughter fill their small living room. Now, all of that was just a memory. However, behind the deep wound, a new determination emerged within her. She didn't want to be a defeated woman. She wanted to prove that she could stand without depending on anyone. "Lily," she said one night when her child was almost asleep, "do you love Mom?" Lily nodded while yawning. "Love you so much. If so, then Lily helps Mom, okay? We both have to be strong." Lily promises, "Mom." Days turned into weeks. Clara became braver in taking on more sewing orders. She went around from one boutique to another, offering her designs. At first, many rejected her, but thanks to her persistence, one large boutique finally accepted a collaboration. The boutique owner, a woman named Victoria, was amazed by Clara's neat stitching and simple yet elegant designs. "You have great talent, Clara. If you want, I can help sell your designs in my other boutique branches," Victoria said with a warm smile. Clara almost couldn't believe it. Her eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you, Victoria. I will do my absolute best." From there, small changes began to be seen. Clara's income slowly increased. She started to be able to save little by little. Every dollar she saved was a symbol of her new strength, a strength born from wounds and humiliation. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his days with Chloe. They were often seen in fancy restaurants, dressing luxuriously, laughing happily as if the world belonged to the two of them. Margaret was also happy, feeling that her daughter-in-law this time was far more fitting. However, that false happiness didn't last long. Chloe began to show her true colors: spoiled, wasteful, and full of demands. "Honey, I want a new car. I'm bored of the one from last month," Chloe whined one afternoon. "The car is only 2 months old." "Yeah, where do you think the money comes from?" Chloe pouted. "If you can't make me happy, why did I leave my other guys for you?" That sentence made David's face turn red. He just realized the woman in front of him wasn't a gentle figure like Clara used to be, but his pride kept him from backing down. He pretended to be strong, even though deep down he began to regret it. Meanwhile, Clara kept moving forward. She took online fashion design courses, learning from a used laptop given by Rachel. Her nights were filled with sewing, designing, and jotting down every little idea that popped up. Every time she saw Lily asleep beside her, Clara smiled a little. "One day, you will be proud of Mom, kiddo." Heavy rain fell that night, but Clara didn't stop working. She kept sewing even though her hands were tired. Amidst the sound of the rain, she whispered softly to herself, "You guys can insult me, you can kick me out, but I will return. Not for revenge, but to show who I truly am." And that night became the witness to the beginning of the journey of a woman who was once rejected, now beginning to walk the path to her own resurrection. She no longer cried, no longer lamented, only one thing she carried in her heart: a promise to make them bow their heads in shame when they realized who Clara really was later on. The first few days at Rachel's house felt awkward for Clara. Her old best friend's house wasn't big, but the atmosphere was warm and far from pressure. In the simple living room, there was a worn sofa, a small bookshelf, and the comforting aroma of coffee. Rachel welcomed Clara and Lily with warm hugs without many questions. "Clara, you stay here for now, okay? Don't worry about anything. Treat it like your own home," Rachel said gently, looking at her best friend's exhausted face. Clara looked down, holding back the tears that almost fell. "Rachel, I don't want to be a burden. I'm just here temporarily. Later, when I have my own place, I'll move out." Rachel patted her shoulder gently. "You're not a stranger, Clara. Back when I was down, you were the one who helped me. Now, it's my turn to help you." Since that night, Clara and Lily occupied a small bedroom in the corner of the house. Its walls were painted light blue, and a small window in the corner reflected the soft morning light. Lily seemed happy. Even without expensive toys, she could laugh together with Rachel's pet cat. Clara began to rebuild her life from zero. With the remaining money from selling her wedding ring, she bought several yards of fabric and thread. Her old sewing machine, which had been broken, was now back in use after being repaired by Rachel's husband. From there, she began taking small orders, sewing loungewear, fixing torn pants, or making custom scarves. Every morning, Clara sat near the window sewing, while Lily sat on the floor playing with fabric scraps. Occasionally, the child asked innocently, "Mom, later when Mom is rich, we can buy a house, right?" Clara smiled while stroking her daughter's head. "Yes, sweetie, but what's important now is Mom works first. Lily will help Mom pray, okay?" The days felt heavy, but Clara began to get used to it. Sometimes at night, she cried silently when Lily was already asleep. The pain of being betrayed hadn't completely vanished, but every time she looked at her daughter's face, that spirit returned. She realized she couldn't be weak. One morning, Rachel came bearing news. "Clara, over in the next neighborhood, there's a women's charity league luncheon. A lot of them like to order custom dresses. Want me to introduce you?" Clara looked at Rachel with sparkling eyes. "Seriously, Rachel? I'd love to. I can make a sample design first so they can see the result." "That's the spirit! You're talented!" "I'm sure your success will come from there." A few days later, Clara went to the house of one of the Charity League heads, bringing 2 sample dresses she had made. At first, she hesitated because some of the women there dressed luxuriously and looked at her with condescending glances. But when the charity head tried on the dress Clara made, everything changed. "Wow, these stitches are so neat, Clara. The material is also comfortable. You made this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. I sewed it myself," answered Clara with a polite smile. "If so, I want to order 2 dozen for next week's gala event." Yes, Clara almost couldn't believe it. 2 dozen orders meant a lot. She went home with a heart trembling between gratitude and emotion. That night, she worked until late. Lily, who was already sleepy, sat beside her, watching her mother sew. "Mom tired?" asked Lily. "A little tired is okay, sweetie, because Mom is making a future for us." The following days were full of busyness. Rachel's small house turned into a workshop. Piles of colorful fabrics filled the dining table, and the sound of the sewing machine became the background music from morning to night. Clara never complained. Instead, she grew more enthusiastic every time she delivered an order and received her first payments. However, it wasn't just money coming in. Clara's name slowly began to be known, from one customer to another. Word about the neat and polite tailor began to spread. Some people came from other neighborhoods just to order clothes from her. Even a few small boutiques began to be interested in buying her sewing work. Rachel was proud to see her best friend's transformation. "Clara, you know what? Now all the ladies in the Charity League are talking about you. They say your sewing is better than the boutiques." Clara smiled a little, but her heart remained cautious. "Thank God, Rachel, but I don't want to get arrogant. I'm still learning." Although her life was beginning to improve, the wound in her heart hadn't fully healed. Sometimes when night came, the shadows of David and Margaret appeared in her mind. She still remembered the cold look in her husband's eyes when he kicked her out. Also, Margaret's loud voice, calling her a failure of a woman. However, every time that pain came, Clara closed her eyes and remembered the promise in her heart. "I will prove it to them. I am not a woman who deserves to be underestimated." One evening, while picking up fabric orders at a store, Clara accidentally saw David and Chloe walking out of a restaurant across the street. They looked intimate, but not like before. There was a tone of tension between the two. Chloe looked at David with an annoyed glare, while David looked tired and stressed. Clara stood on the sidewalk, hugging Lily, who happened to be with her. Her heart trembled, but this time not out of longing. She just felt pity. Not for David, but for herself in the past who had fought for the wrong person. "Mom, that's Daddy," asked Lily softly. Clara looked at her child and nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetie, but now Daddy has his own life." Lily wants to say hi to Daddy. Clara gripped that small hand tightly. "Later, sweetie, now is not the time." She turned around, walking away without looking back. There was a tightness in her chest, but her steps remained upright. That night, Clara realized she was beginning to truly stand on her own. A few months passed. The orders kept flowing. Even a large boutique in the city began to eye Clara's work. She was invited to join a local fashion exhibition. When she received that invitation, her hands trembled, but her eyes shone with enthusiasm. "Lily, Mom got an invitation for an exhibition, sweetie," she said with a happy tone. Lily jumped for joy. "That means Mom is successful now?" Clara smiled, hugging her child tightly. "Not completely yet, but we are on the right path, kiddo." That night, Clara sat by the window looking at the starry sky. In her heart, she whispered softly, "Thank you, God. I don't ask for them to be destroyed. I just ask for the strength to be the best version of myself." However, without her realizing it, those small steps toward success would slowly lead her to a meeting that would later make David, Margaret, and Chloe bow their heads in shame before her. The day when Clara was no longer the outcast woman, but a figure standing on the stage of honor. That day, the sky looked bright, and the air felt lighter than usual. Clara had just finished a modern tailored lace dress in a pastel color ordered by a client, Linda, one of the Charity League women who first trusted Clara with her sewing. As soon as Linda came to pick up her order, her eyes sparkled. "Oh my gosh, this is so beautiful, Clara. The stitching is fine, the cut fits the body perfectly. I love it so much." Clara smiled warmly, looking at her creation with pride. "I'm glad if it fits, Linda. I tried my best. It fits perfectly. You know, tomorrow I'm going to Victoria Couture Boutique. I'm going to wear this dress so people know who sewed it," Linda said while laughing a little. Clara just laughed softly. She didn't expect that simple sentence would later change her entire life. 2 days later, the Victoria Couture Boutique was bustling with clients from the city's high society. Among them, Victoria, a middle-aged woman known to be disciplined and a perfectionist, was observing the details of one of her regular clients' outfits, and her eyes immediately focused on the pastel lace dress Linda was wearing. "That dress? You look very beautiful, Linda. Which boutique is it from?" she asked curiously. "Oh, this isn't from a boutique, Victoria. This was sewn by my regular tailor. Her name is Clara. She works from home, but her results are amazing." Victoria furrowed her brow. "Clara, I've never heard of her, but the work is excellent. Neat, elegant, like a professional designer's work." "Exactly, Victoria. If you want, I can give you her contact number. Who knows? You might be able to collaborate." That night, Clara, who was busy preparing orders, suddenly received a call from an unknown number. "Good evening. Is this Clara?" "Yes, that's right. Who am I speaking to?" "I am Victoria, owner of Victoria Couture Boutique. I heard a lot about your work from my client, Linda. I'm interested in seeing your sewing results in person. Can we set up a meeting?" Clara was silent for a moment. Her heart beat fast. She almost couldn't believe a famous boutique owner wanted to meet her. "Of course, Victoria. I am very grateful for the opportunity. I can come whenever you want." The next day, Clara went to the Victoria Couture Boutique, bringing some sample designs in a tote bag. She wore simple clothes, but neat and polite. Upon entering the grand boutique with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, she felt nervous for a moment. The polished marble floor and the scent of expensive perfume made her realize how big the world she was about to enter was. Victoria welcomed her in the office. "Please have a seat, Clara," she said with a friendly but professional tone. "Thank you, Victoria." Clara opened her bag and took out some fabric pieces and design sketches. There was a modern tailored dress with a classic touch, a simple but elegant evening gown, and a women's blazer with a feminine cut. Victoria examined each one with full attention. Her fingers touched the fabric, felt the stitching, and her eyes stared at the pattern details Clara made by hand. "This is extraordinary," she finally said. "I didn't expect you to work alone without a team. The details are neat, the designs are fresh, and there's character in every stitch." Clara bowed politely. "Thank you very much, Victoria. I just try to pour my heart into every stitch, and it shows," Victoria remarked with a small smile. "If you are willing, I want you to collaborate with my boutique. We can start with a limited production. You can still work from home for now, If the results are consistent, I will help you develop your own label under my boutique's umbrella." That sentence was like lightning in broad daylight for Clara, but not frightening lightning, rather one that shook her heart with gratitude. "Really, Victoria?" I don't know what to say. "I am very grateful for your trust." Victoria smiled. "All I need is one thing, Clara. Stay humble and disciplined. This fashion world is tough, but I believe you can shine." The following weeks became a turning point in Clara's life. She began creating designs for Victoria Couture Boutique. Her designs slowly gained a place in clients' hearts. Her simple but elegant dresses began to be worn by socialites at major events. Clara's name began to be heard among major boutiques. Although not many knew who the woman behind those designs actually was, Lily often accompanied her mother sewing at night. "Mom, who is that dress for?" she asked every time she saw new fabric on the work table. "For someone who wants to look beautiful, sweetie. But Mom makes it with all my heart, so whoever wears it feels happy." Lily nodded innocently. "If Mom gets famous later, can Lily wear Mom's dresses too?" Clara smiled, hugging her child tightly. "Of course, sweetie. You will be the very first one Mom makes a beautiful gown for." A few months passed. Clara's hard work paid off. Victoria decided to officially introduce Clara at the boutique's fashion show event. "Clara, I want you to appear at the end of the show later. I want people to know who the designer is," Victoria said with a proud tone. Clara was silent, her heart trembling. "But, Victoria, I'm just a home tailor. Is it appropriate for me to appear at an event that big?" Victoria looked at her deeply. "You're not just a tailor, Clara. You're a creator. People like you deserve to stand at the front." The day of the event arrived. The grand building in the city center was full of invited guests. Spotlights illuminated the runway, showcasing the latest collection of Victoria Couture, mostly designed by Clara. When the music stopped and the name Clara Designs flashed on the big screen, thundering applause filled the room. Clara walked slowly onto the stage wearing a simple black gown. Her face was beaming even though her eyes were teary. In the glare of those lights, she remembered the day when she walked on a dark street carrying 2 suitcases and her little child. The day when she was kicked out, insulted, and deemed worthless. Now, all of it was like a dream. She didn't just stand, she shined. After the event, many people came up to her, praising her work, asking for collaborations. Even several local media outlets began covering her story as a new designer with a heartfelt touch. Clara could only smile, hiding a sense of emotion that was almost unbearable. That night, as she went home with Lily, she looked at the sky from the car window. "Lily," she whispered softly, "look at those stars. Mom used to only be able to look from below. Now Mom feels one of them might be shining for us." Lily laughed a little and hugged her mother. Lily is proud of Mom. And deep in Clara's heart, an unshakable belief was imprinted that the wounds of the past were not the end, but stepping stones to stand taller. The world was beginning to know her, but she knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't done. Because the upcoming journey would reunite her with the past that once kicked her out with insults. And when that time arrived, they would bow their heads in regret. Clara's days now felt so packed, but there was a warm feeling that always accompanied her. In her simple rented house, the sound of the sewing machine became the music of a new life. Every morning, she started with a warm cup of coffee, watched Lily busy preparing her school books, and then turned on the sewing machine. The small table in the living room was now filled with colorful fabrics, threads, needles, and design sketches that slowly showed her talent and perseverance. At first, only a few clients from the surrounding neighborhood ordered clothes. However, because her stitching was neat and the models always adjusted to the client's body shape, they kept coming back and brought their friends. Clara's name started to be talked about among the suburban women. Some were even willing to wait in line just to have clothes sewn by her. Lily, though still young, often helped with her sweet smile. "Mom, I picked out these buttons. Light blue to match the dress," she said one afternoon, carrying a small container of buttons. Clara smiled, stroking her child's hair. "Thank you, sweetie. You help Mom a lot." The relationship between mother and daughter grew tighter. They no longer lived in luxury, but rather in peace. There were no shouting sounds, no pressure from a mother-in-law, no fear like before. Clara felt more alive, even though she had to work hard from morning to night. One day, while Clara was ironing her sewing work, a client came bringing several pieces of expensive fabric. The woman, named Nicole, was an old friend of one of her former clients at Victoria's boutique. "I heard Clara here has a magic touch. Yeah. Can you help me make a modern evening gown? I want to wear it for a big family event next month," she said friendly. Clara was briefly surprised by the very expensive fabric material. "God willing, I can, Nicole. But I need about 2 weeks, okay? I want the result to be truly perfect." "All right, I trust you, Clara," answered Nicole with a smile. From that order, the news about Clara's work spread even wider. It didn't take long for many new clients to arrive. Some even deliberately came from out of town after seeing a post on social media made by Lily. Yes, the little child innocently helped take pictures of her mother's work and uploaded them with a simple caption, "Mom's work, red heart, Clara designs beautiful gowns." That post received a lot of positive responses. From there, several local influencers began to be interested in collaborating. One of them even invited Clara to make a custom outfit for a local fashion event. At first, Clara hesitated, but encouragement from Lily and Rachel made her brave enough to take the step. "Just be confident, Clara. You have great talent. You just have to dare to show it. You were brought down before because they thought you had nothing. Now it's your time to rise," Rachel said with a sincere look. Slowly, that step brought Clara toward a new life. She learned to read business opportunities, attended small workshops on women's entrepreneurship, and saved little by little to buy a larger industrial sewing machine. One evening, while counting order profits, Clara fell into thought. "I used to be afraid to live without David. Now I actually feel stronger without him." Tears fell, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. However, fate seemed to want to test the steadfastness of her heart again. When one of the local fashion events was held at a large hotel owned by a famous chain, Clara got the opportunity to showcase her designs there. She didn't know that the hotel actually belonged to David's family, the place she could once only enter as a poor daughter-in-law. When the day of the event arrived, Clara came in elegant clothes she designed herself. Her hair was styled in a modern updo. Her appearance completely changed. There was no longer the weak woman who was once kicked out with insults. She walked confidently while holding Lily's hand, who had now grown into a sweet and dignified young girl. In the hotel lobby, whispers could be heard. "Isn't that Clara, David's ex-wife? Oh my gosh, she is so beautiful now, like a successful woman." And sure enough, from a distance, David, along with his mother, Margaret, was seen standing in the VIP guest area. Their faces changed instantly upon seeing Clara. Margaret's eyes widened, unable to believe the transformation in front of her. David froze, his voice caught in his throat. Clara only gave a thin smile, then walked past them without looking back in the slightest. She stepped gracefully toward the main stage, where her name was clearly displayed on the big screen. Clara Collection, modern and elegant gowns, inspiring work. Cheers and applause echoed when her designs were showcased. At that moment, David could only watch from afar. His face tensed, and his heart was hit by an unbearable sense of shame. On the other hand, Margaret looked down deeply, as if wanting to swallow the harsh words she had once thrown. All the guests' gazes that night turned to Clara, the woman who was once considered weak and useless. Now she became tangible proof that sincerity, hard work, and patience could overthrow arrogance and humiliation. However, Clara didn't come to seek revenge that night. She just wanted to show that the woman they once trampled on could now stand without depending on anyone. She wanted to teach a lesson that life doesn't stop just because someone leaves you. And amidst the cheers, Clara looked at Lily, hugged her tightly, and whispered softly, "We did it, sweetie. This is all because of you." Lily smiled, looking at her mother with sparkling eyes. "I am proud of you, Mom." That night became the turning point of Clara's life entirely. She was no longer a woman crying in the dark. She was now a woman whose shine made everyone who had ever belittled her bow in silence. Yet, behind all that success, Clara remained the same. Clara, gentle, humble, and full of love. She never regretted her past, because from those wounds, the strength that shaped her now was born. And anyone who saw her that night would agree. A woman who was once destroyed can become the strongest figure when she chooses to rise. Clara's life had truly turned around, far from the lowest point she had ever experienced. Now, every step she took was filled with gratitude and pride. Who would have thought the woman who was once kicked out of her mother-in-law's house with only 2 suitcases and a small child in her arms now stood as one of the young entrepreneurs inspiring many people? That morning, Clara sat in front of her vanity, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was neatly styled. Her face looked calm and authoritative. Behind her, Lily, who was now in elementary school, was busy braiding her doll's hair. "Mom, are you going to be a speaker again today?" Lily asked innocently, looking at her mother. Clara smiled gently. "Yes, sweetie." This time, at a small business seminar in the next city, many women want to learn how to start a business from home. Just like Mom started. Lily approached and hugged Clara's waist. "I'm proud of Mom." That little hug warmed Clara's heart. She knew her struggle was not in vain. All the nights she spent with tears and exhaustion were now replaced with a simple but sincere feeling of happiness. A few hours later, Clara arrived at the venue, a simple auditorium filled with attendees, mostly housewives and young women wanting to be independent. When her name was called, applause thundered. "Welcome, Clara. Owner of Clara Collection, an inspiration of a tough woman who started from zero," said the host. Clara stepped to the front with a friendly smile. She wore a modern, soft-colored tailored dress of her own design. Every step radiated elegance, yet remained unpretentious. "Good morning, everyone," she opened her speech. Her voice was gentle but full of conviction. "I used to be just an ordinary housewife. I was once brought down, underestimated, even kicked out. But from that pain, I learned that what determines our self-worth is not what people say, but our own determination and effort." The room instantly fell silent. The attendees seemed to listen with teary eyes. Some looked down, others secretly wiped away tears. Clara's story was like a whip for many women who had ever felt worthless. "If I can rise from the lowest point, you can too," Clara continued, her voice trembling but full of conviction. "Start with what you have. No matter how small, don't wait for time, because time will not wait for us." After the session ended, many attendees came up to shake her hand, asking for photos or simply saying thank you. A middle-aged woman even hugged Clara tightly, saying, "Thank you for making me brave enough to dream again, dear." Those words made Clara's heart tremble. She realized her life now was not just about building a business, but about giving hope to others. A few months passed. Clara's business skyrocketed. Clara Collection now had a small team and a modest showroom in the city center. Demands came from various regions, even some from overseas through online sales. Lily, who used to only accompany her in the rented house, now often joined her mother at the boutique. The child grew into a sweet, polite, and smart girl, a small reflection of her mother's resilience. However, amidst her success, fate reunited Clara with her past again unexpectedly. One afternoon, just after she finished briefing her new employees, a guest arrived at her boutique. When the door opened, Clara's steps briefly halted. Standing before her was a man with a face she had once loved with all her heart. David, his face looked tired. His appearance was no longer as elegant as before. The expensive suits he used to wear were now replaced with simple clothes. And in his eyes, there were deep lines of regret. "Clara." His voice was faint, barely audible. Clara stood tall, looking at him expressionlessly. "Is there something you need, David?" He looked down, taking a deep breath. "I just want to apologize for everything. I realize I was wrong. I lost everything, Clara. Chloe left me when the business crashed. Mom is also sick now." Clara remained silent. She no longer felt anger like before. Her heart was healed. "I'm sorry, David," she said calmly, "but all of that is in the past. I hold no grudges. In fact, I am thankful, because from all that pain, I learned to be strong. David looked at her with teary eyes. I just wanted you to know. I regret it, Clara. Clara gave a thin smile. Regret is good, David, but time cannot be reversed. I am already happy now. Please don't disturb my life again. She walked away, leaving David standing silently at the boutique door. Her steps were light, upright, and full of conviction, a sign that she was truly free from the shadows of the past. A few days later, a business news portal wrote an article titled, "From an Abandoned Housewife to a National Inspiration, the Success Story of Clara Collection." The article went viral across various social media platforms. Many people admired her life journey. Even several universities and entrepreneurial institutions invited her as a guest speaker. At every opportunity, Clara always emphasized one thing: that a woman's greatest strength is not in who accompanies her, but in herself. Her ability to rise, learn, and keep moving forward. One night, when everything was quiet, Clara sat on the balcony of her new home, simple but comfortable. The night breeze blew gently, carrying the scent of jasmine flowers she had planted herself. Lily came over, hugging her from behind. "Mom," she called softly. Clara turned, smiling. "Yes, sweetie, I want to have a business like Mom later, but I also want to help people who are struggling." Clara smiled, moved, hugging her child tightly. "That's a beautiful dream, sweetie. Mom will help you make it come true." The night sky was full of stars. In her heart, Clara knew her life's journey wasn't over. But now she walked no longer with tears, but with conviction and sincerity. And anyone who ever knew her would always remember one thing: Clara was not just a woman who successfully rose from ruin, but also a woman who turned wounds into strength and sadness into a light that guided many people. That day, the city looked bustling. The sky was clear, with white clouds drifting slowly. In one of the most luxurious hotels downtown, the atmosphere looked festive. Soft music was heard from the main hall, beautifully decorated with white flowers and sparkling gold nuances. There, David and Chloe were getting ready to hold their wedding ceremony. Margaret sat in the seat of honor with a beaming face. Her wide smile never faded since morning. She wore a dark purple designer dress with sequins. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo. She proudly welcomed everyone who came, as if that day was not just her son's wedding, but also a victory over something. "Thank God. Finally, my son got a matching wife," she said to the guest sitting next to her. "Beautiful, educated, and from a respectable family. Not like the old one, who only knew how to sew and didn't understand manners." Chloe, sitting in the makeup room, heard that whisper and smiled a little. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was perfectly made up. An ivory white gown wrapped her body, but in her smile, there was a faint arrogance. "Margaret is right," she said softly to herself. "I finally got the place I deserve." Meanwhile, David stood on the other side of the room in an elegant gray suit. However, behind his neat appearance, there was an indescribable restlessness. He stared at the ring in his hand, then took a deep breath. For a moment, Clara's image appeared in his mind, her gentle smile, her patience, and the look in her eyes that was always full of understanding. He shook his head quickly, trying to erase the image. "Enough. This is your path now," he muttered in his heart. "Chloe is more fitting. Your life will be better." In a much simpler place, Clara was sitting in front of her sewing machine. On her small table were several pieces of soft-colored silk fabric. Lily, who was now a bit older, sat beside her drawing in her sketchbook. "Mom, I drew a pretty flower, right?" she said, showing her drawing. Clara looked at her child with a warm smile. "Very pretty, sweetie. You're getting better at drawing, huh?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I want to help Mom make clothes later." Clara laughed a little. Then her hands moved back over the sewing machine. The gold-colored thread danced over the fabric, forming a beautiful pattern. The sound of a phone vibrating on the table. Clara picked it up, a message from her best friend, Rachel. "Clara, you know what? David is getting married today to Chloe at the Grand Heritage Hotel. The event is super luxurious. Clara read the message expressionlessly. Her eyes stared at the screen for quite a long time. Then, slowly, she put the phone back down. Her lips formed a thin smile. Let it be. Maybe that's the happiness they chose, she said softly. However, deep in her heart, there was a strange vibration, not because of jealousy nor anger, more of a sense of relief, like someone who finally closes an old chapter in her life. She stroked Lily's hair gently. The important thing is now Mom and Lily are happy. That's enough. Meanwhile, at the luxury hotel, guests arrived in glamorous outfits. Waiters walked back and forth carrying drinks and appetizers. On the stage, a decoration reading David and Chloe. A new beginning was displayed largely. Chloe walked in with graceful steps, welcomed by admiring glances from the guests. Cameras lined the sides of the room, capturing her every step. Margaret looked at her daughter-in-law proudly. "Look, Susan," she said to her friend, "my daughter-in-law is now beautiful, rich, and educated, perfectly fit to be David's wife." "Wow, Margaret is truly lucky," replied her friend with a meaningful smile. "I heard your first daughter-in-law was very simple, huh?" Margaret snorted. "Simple? Not simple, Susan. Inappropriate and ungrateful." A few people who heard chuckled. They didn't know that those words would later become the hardest slap to her face. Meanwhile, Clara sat on the porch of her house with Rachel. "Are you okay, Clara?" asked Rachel softly, looking at her best friend's face. Clara nodded, looking at the afternoon sky starting to turn orange. "I am fine. I have passed the phase where I wanted to be angry or cry. Now I just want to live peacefully." Rachel sighed in relief, but still seemed hesitant. "But seeing them happy, doesn't it hurt?" Clara smiled gently. "True happiness is not measured by luxurious parties, Rachel. I've learned that. I used to think love alone was enough. Now I know love without respect means nothing." Rachel looked at Clara with teary eyes. She knew her best friend was no longer the woman who used to cry in her arms. Now Clara was far more mature, stronger. "Sometimes I wonder, Clara, you are so patient, even though you have reasons to be angry." Clara laughed a little. "If I get angry, what changes? I'll just waste energy on people who aren't worth my thoughts." She looked ahead. Her smile was calm. In her heart, she promised that one day she would show the world, and perhaps also to those who had belittled her, who she really was. But not with revenge, but with tangible success and happiness. At the hotel, the party continued. Chloe sat at the reception, smiling at the guests who came to shake her hand. David appeared, trying to display a happy face, although occasionally his gaze was blank. During the photo session, Margaret repeatedly gave directions, so everything looked perfect. "David, smile. Don't space out like that. This is your happy day," she said, patting her son's shoulder. David nodded slowly, but in his heart, there was a strange feeling he couldn't understand. Chloe's proud gaze in front of the camera felt empty to him. He tried to smile, but behind it, there was the shadow of a woman who used to stand in the small kitchen preparing breakfast with a tired but happy face. The shadow of Clara. And somehow, for a moment, he felt he had lost something that could never be replaced. Afternoon began to turn into evening. In her small house, Clara looked at her newly finished sewing work. She neatly folded the simple yet elegant gown. Lily approached, staring at the fabric in awe. "Mom, who ordered this dress?" Clara smiled. "A new client. She said she wants to wear it for a big event. I hope it fits." Yes, she didn't know. That day was the point where her life and David's life would intersect again. No one could have guessed that the thread of fate was slowly weaving their meeting back together. But this time, in a very different position, and Clara, the woman who was once kicked out with insults, would stand in a place far higher than anyone ever imagined. That night, the city lights flickered like stars falling to earth. The atmosphere in the luxurious hotel ballroom was so grand. The red carpet was rolled out, and elegantly dressed guests walked with full confidence. The hotel that once witnessed Clara's heartbreak was now going to be her stage of vindication. Clara stepped out of a classy black car driven by her personal chauffeur. Lily walked beside her, wearing a pastel-colored little dress. That small face was beaming, as if inheriting her mother's calmness. Clara wore a long, dark blue satin gown with elegant makeup showing the aura of an authoritative woman. Every step radiated a self-confidence that wasn't forced. Several hotel staff standing in the lobby spontaneously bowed respectfully. They recognized Clara's face as the main donor for that night's event. However, Clara only replied with a polite smile. There was no arrogance on her face, only calmness radiating from maturity and mature self-confidence. "Ma'am, the committee has prepared a special seat for you in the guest of honor row," said a young woman who was on the event committee. "All right, thank you," Clara answered gently. She gripped Lily's small hand. "Come on, sweetie, sit over there, okay? Don't go far from Mom." Lily nodded sweetly. "Yes, Mom. Lily is so proud of Mom today." That innocent remark made Clara's smile even warmer. In her heart, she knew the struggle she went through all this time wasn't just to seek revenge, but so her child would grow up seeing that her mother is strong, not destroyed even when brought down. The event started merrily. Soft music played. Spotlights illuminated the grand stage with a large screen reading, "Inspiring Entrepreneur Awards and Top Donors 2025. Several important figures sat in the front row. On the other side of the room, among the invited guests, David and Chloe were also present. They had just gotten married a few weeks ago, and that night attended as guests of honor upon the invitation of Chloe's family, who had broad connections in the business world. Chloe looked stunning in a sparkling gown. Meanwhile, David stood beside her in a black suit. However, behind their smiles, there was a shadow of nervousness that was hard to hide. "Honey, this hotel has a great reputation, huh?" Chloe said with a satisfied tone. "I'm so glad our family could attend an event this big. A lot of top entrepreneurs came." David nodded. "Yeah, and they say one of the main donors is a very successful young female entrepreneur. Who could it be?" Chloe smiled faintly. "I don't know, but I'm sure she's no ordinary person. Probably a politician's wife or a billionaire's daughter." Soon, the host went up on stage. "Good evening, honorable guests. Tonight, we will give special awards to several inspiring figures who have greatly contributed to the business and social world in America. One of them is a woman known to be tough, smart, and humble. She successfully built an independent company that now employs hundreds of people and is the main donor for tonight's event." The spotlights began searching toward the main door. "Please give a round of applause for Miss Clara Hathaway." All eyes turned. That name made David spontaneously tense up, while Chloe narrowed her eyes as if not believing what she had just heard. Clara stepped forward gracefully and confidently. The sound of her high heels was soft on the red carpet. Every eye that looked at her was mesmerized by the aura she radiated. Her face, which used to be simple, was now so classy, yet remained warm. David froze. His face went pale instantly. "Clara," he whispered softly, his voice barely coming out. Chloe looked at her husband, then stared at the stage with a furrowed brow. "You know her?" David swallowed hard. His eyes couldn't leave the figure of the woman who now stood in front of thousands of guests. "That is my ex-wife." Chloe turned quickly, her face tensed between shock and disbelief. She didn't expect the woman she once heard was just a poor housewife to now appear so magnificent in front of everyone. Clara accepted the award from the committee with a calm and authoritative smile. "I believe that every failure in life is not the end of everything, but rather the beginning of an opportunity to rise. I used to fall, be underestimated, even abandoned. But precisely from there, I learned to stand on my own, build a life from scratch, and prove that someone's worth is not determined by wealth, but by determination and a heart that never gives up." The room was silent. Some people seemed amazed. Others clapped with full respect. David could only look down, feeling all those words slapping his face. After the event was over, Clara walked towards the outside of the room, holding Lily's hand. But before she truly left the hall, a familiar voice called her, "Clara." Clara turned slowly. David stood behind her. His face was a mix of regret and a longing that couldn't be hidden. Chloe stood a few steps behind, glaring with eyes full of envy and anger. "Good evening, David," Clara said calmly. Glad to see you healthy and happy. David looked deep into her eyes, his voice trembling. You're amazing, Clara. I never expected you could get this far. Clara smiled faintly. You didn't need to expect it, David. I only did what I had to do when the world brought me down. Chloe stepped forward. Her tone was high. So, you came here to show off? To humiliate us in front of everyone? Clara looked at her with a small smile, but her eyes were sharp. I came here not to show off, let alone humiliate. I was invited as an entrepreneur and a donor. If you feel humiliated, maybe it's because you once underestimated someone you thought was worthless. That sentence made Chloe choke, unable to reply. David just remained silent, looking down in a suffocating guilt. Clara gripped Lily's hand tighter. Let's go, sweetie. We're going home. Tonight has been long enough. Lily looked at her father for a moment, then whispered, That's my dad, Mom. Clara looked softly. Yes, sweetie, but what's most important is you have a mom who always loves you, and that is enough. They walked away, leaving David and Chloe frozen in place. In silence, David realized that night was not just about an award, but about the biggest loss in his life. And Clara walked out of that hotel with her head held high, leaving the past forever without needing to look back. That night, the sparkle of the crystal chandeliers on the hotel ceiling reflected light into every corner of the room. Soft music from the accompanying band added to the luxurious and prestigious atmosphere. In the middle of that grand hall, David, Chloe, and Margaret became the center of attention. Chloe, in a luxurious, sparkling gold gown, looked so confident. She smiled gracefully every time someone praised her, holding David tightly as if wanting to assert that happiness was now truly on her side. Margaret was no less beaming. In an emerald green designer dress, she spread smiles to every passing guest. My son is now truly happy, she said with a proud tone to one middle-aged female guest. Look at my daughter-in-law, beautiful, from a respectable family, and has broad connections. It is a perfect match. The guest laughed a little while, praising, Wow, Margaret is very lucky. Getting Chloe. Everyone knows her family has a huge influence in the business world. Margaret nodded in satisfaction. Of course, we are finally on the same level. In the past, my son made a wrong choice, but well, let bygones be bygones, she stated in a loud tone, as if wanting everyone to hear. David just gave a small smile, even though in his eyes there was a shadow of fatigue disguised behind the room's lights. Chloe was busy greeting guests, throwing compliments here and there with full style. Everything was going perfectly until the sound of soft footsteps was heard from the direction of the main door. All heads turned. The figure of a woman in an elegant midnight blue gown walked in with a little girl. Her steps were calm, graceful, but full of authority. Her hair was styled in a modern updo. Her face was captivating without being overdone. The light seemed to shine only on her, Clara. However, no one immediately recognized her. Her transformation was too far from the simple figure they used to underestimate. Now she was like a classy noblewoman, full of charm and radiating an aura of gentle strength. She walked slowly on the red carpet holding Lily's small hand, who wore a soft white dress with a light blue ribbon at the waist. Every eye that stared couldn't look away. Even some male guests were silent for a moment, while their wives whispered in awe to each other. Who is she? One guest whispered softly to her friend. I don't know, maybe a guest of honor from the event sponsor. So beautiful. Her aura is strong, right? Not just beautiful. Look at her attitude, elegant and educated. Clara smiled a little hearing those whispers, but she kept walking calmly towards the row of VIP guest chairs. The committee members who knew her name immediately welcomed her with full respect. Welcome, Miss Clara Hathaway. We have prepared a seat in the front row. Thank you, Clara answered gently. I don't want to stand out. Let me sit a bit to the side. I just want to enjoy the event tonight. The committee seemed hesitant, but obliged. Clara sat calmly, gently patting the back of Lily's hand, who sat beside her. However, in an instant, her presence began to steal attention. Every movement she made looked classy. Every small smile she gave invited gasps of awe. Several female guests who initially were busy chatting immediately fell silent, paying attention. Meanwhile, across the room, Chloe turned her head. Her eyes caught the figure of the familiar woman at the end of the hall. She observed longer, trying to make sure, her heart fluttering strangely. "David," she whispered softly, "look at that woman over there." David furrowed his brow, following Chloe's gaze. Instantly, his breath hitched, his heart beat hard. "Clara." His voice was barely audible. Margaret, who happened to hear, also turned, her eyebrows raised high, her eyes widened in disbelief. "No way? That's Clara?" Chloe gripped David's arm tightly. "Are you serious? That's your ex-wife?" "Impossible. That woman looks like a major executive." David stared without blinking. All memories invaded his mind at once. Clara, who used to be simple, who accompanied him when he had nothing, who cooked in the cramped kitchen of their rented apartment, who was always patient even when insulted by his mother. And now that woman stood before him, with an appearance that made the entire room tremble with admiration. When the host mentioned the names of the main donors that night, the atmosphere became even more unexpected. And of course, this event would not have been possible without the great contribution from one of the most influential young female entrepreneurs this year. She is the founder of Clara Group and the main donor tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Miss Clara Hathaway. The whole room immediately broke into applause. David instantly looked down. Chloe stared at him with a pale face. Meanwhile, Margaret stared straight ahead as if struck by lightning. Her steps were steady toward the stage. Every step was like a whip breaking their past arrogance. An aura of self-confidence radiated from her eyes, but the smile on her face remained gentle. When she took the microphone, her soft voice echoed calmly. "Thank you for the honor tonight. I didn't expect my life journey to bring me this far. Life taught me that falling doesn't mean losing, and losing doesn't mean the end. Sometimes, precisely from loss, we find a new direction to grow." All the guests were mesmerized. Not a single one dared to make a sound. Her sentences touched the heart, simple but deep. "I used to stand in a different position, but tonight, I learned that true happiness doesn't come from the acknowledgement of others, but from the ability to forgive and keep moving forward without holding a grudge." After her speech was finished, Clara walked down the stage calmly. A few people shook her hand, giving compliments. Chloe stared at her with a mix of envy and disbelief. Margaret couldn't even straighten her body. Her face was tense, holding back shame. David gathered the courage to approach. "Clara," his voice was soft, almost inaudible. Clara turned. Her smile was calm. "David, glad to see you attended. You are amazing now," he stuttered. "I don't know what to say." Clara just looked at him deeply. "No need to say anything, David. Let bygones be bygones. We all have our own paths. I have forgiven everything." Chloe looked at them with a reddened face. "Forgive? You think we need to be forgiven?" Clara looked at her gently but meaningfully. "It's not you that I'm setting free by forgiving, Chloe. It's myself." That sentence made the atmosphere around them freeze. Chloe couldn't answer. David looked down, realizing that the woman in front of him was no longer the Clara he used to underestimate. She had become someone far higher than the prestige he ever chased. When Clara walked away with Lily, all eyes followed her steps. She no longer walked as the abandoned ex-wife, but as the woman who had won in silence. And behind her, David, Chloe, and Margaret could only stare at her back with mixed feelings of awe, shame, and a regret that came too late. Chloe stared at the woman in the blue gown for quite a long time. Her eyes tried to trace every detail. The shape of her face, her smile, the way she walked, even her voice when talking to the committee in front of the stage. Everything felt familiar, but her mind refused to believe it. "Impossible," she muttered softly, almost like talking to herself. "Clara couldn't possibly be like that. That woman is too perfect." David, sitting next to her, just remained silent. He tried to look relaxed, but his fingers nervously adjusting his tie indicated something was raging in his chest. His gaze couldn't leave the figure of that woman. In his heart, there was a strange throb between shock, awe, and guilt that suddenly slipped in without permission. "David," whispered Chloe, slightly pinching his arm. You keep staring at her? You know her, huh? David swallowed the water in front of him before answering. No, I just feel like I've seen her before. Chloe looked at him sharply. Don't lie. I know that face isn't foreign to you. Before David could respond, Margaret interrupted. Why are you two whispering? The reception isn't over yet. Don't embarrass us. Chloe quickly turned her head, but her eyes returned to the woman who was now sitting calmly in the VIP row. Margaret, she said softly but firmly, look at that woman. The one in the dark blue dress over there. Margaret glanced briefly. Her face seemed unbothered. Ah, probably a politician guest, or a businesswoman. Just look at the way she sits. She looks like someone with money. Chloe furrowed her brow. But Margaret, I feel like I've seen her face. I don't know where. Margaret shrugged, laughing cynically. Maybe she just looks like someone. Don't exaggerate. Besides, how could someone like Clara be here? Do you think she could look like that? That sentence made David's chest feel tight. He remembered how Clara used to cry silently in the bedroom, enduring the heartbreak from his mother's words. Clara's tired face when sewing clothes at midnight to help the family economy. Hands full of wounds from needles. All of that appeared so clearly in his mind. But now the woman sitting up there was so far different. Her smile was calm, her attitude elegant. Her eyes radiated resolve, not sorrow. The atmosphere of the room slowly changed. It was no longer just a wedding party full of laughter and music, but there was a strange vibration felt in the air. Several guests also began noticing the woman, whispering with awe. Who is that? Doesn't look like an ordinary guest. Looks like someone important. Look at how the committee welcomed her earlier. Chloe grew increasingly restless. She felt the guest spotlight starting to shift from her, who was originally the center of attention, towards that woman. An uncomfortable feeling crept into her chest, mixed with jealousy that suddenly emerged. I don't like it, she whispered with an annoyed tone. David turned. Don't like what? That woman. Everyone is looking at her. This is my big day. But she's stealing the spotlight, and somehow I feel something weird. David looked at Chloe's increasingly annoyed face. Whatever. Don't think about it. Just enjoy the event. However, even his own voice sounded flat, far from calm. On the other hand, Margaret, who was initially busy talking with guests, now started to feel uneasy. She saw from a distance several important people in the room approaching the woman in the blue gown, including the core committee and two major corporate sponsors. They seemed to talk with full respect, even shaking hands while laughing familiarly. Margaret's heart began to flutter. Who exactly is that woman, she thought. She tried to remember, but that face truly made her restless. There was something embedded in her mind, something from a blurry past. Margaret, Chloe whispered again. I'm serious. Try to look closely. Her face looks exactly like Clara's. Look at the way she smiles. Exactly the same. Margaret narrowed her eyes, looking longer. And this time, something in her chest felt like a sharp pinch. The expression on her face, the lines of her lips, the look in her eyes that was calm but sharp. Yes, it really looked exactly like Clara. However, her brain rejected that logic. No, impossible, she said quickly. It's just a coincidence. David, who had been silent all this time, finally stood up from his chair with the excuse of wanting to go to the restroom, but his steps actually brought him closer toward the woman in the blue gown. He couldn't restrain himself. There was a curiosity that was too strong. When the distance was only a few steps, the woman turned. Just a glance, but enough to make David's breath hitch. That look in her eyes, he couldn't be wrong. It was truly Clara. But before he could open his mouth, she smiled. A smile that was no longer the same as before. Not a smile full of hope or sorrow, but the smile of someone who had made peace with her past. Good evening, David, she said calmly. Congratulations on the wedding. David fell silent. His voice caught in his throat. You came here. Clara gave a light nod. I was invited by the committee. There is an awards event tonight. Coincidentally in the same place. David could only stare at her face. You look different. Clara smiled faintly. Time changes many things, David. But not to be regretted, only to be learned from. Without waiting for a reply, Clara walked away calmly, holding the small hand of Lily again, who had been looking at her father silently. The little child's eyes were sad but strong. She looked down a bit, then whispered to her mother, "Mom, that's Dad, right?" Clara looked at Lily gently. "Yes, sweetie. But now Dad has his own life. We also already have our life. Don't be sad, okay?" Lily gave a small nod. Even though her eyes were teary, David stood frozen in place, unable to say anything. The world seemed to spin slowly. Meanwhile, at the main table, Margaret started to get restless, seeing her son talking to that woman. She called a waiter, asking something in a rushed tone. "Who is that woman with the little girl in the blue dress?" The waiter answered politely. "Oh, that is Miss Clara Hathaway, ma'am. The successful entrepreneur, main donor for tonight's event." The glass in Margaret's hand almost slipped. Chloe, who was sitting next to her, spontaneously turned. Her face froze. "What? Main donor?" The waiter nodded innocently. "Yes, ma'am. She is very famous now. Many say she's one of the wealthiest women in this city." Silence. Margaret couldn't hide her shock. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Chloe held her own chest. Her breathing quickened, while in the distance, David was still frozen, staring at Clara's back, slowly moving away. Her steps were steady, upright, and without looking back in the slightest. And when the music in the room played again, the party atmosphere that was initially grand and full of pride turned momentarily silent. No one knew why, but a strange aura filled the room, like something had just been shaken without a word. Meanwhile, Clara walked out of the hall with a small smile on her lips, looking at Lily walking beside her while gripping her hand tightly. That night, it wasn't she who lost. She had actually won everything in the calmest way they never expected. The voice of the host echoing that name resounded throughout the grand hall, piercing the walls of pride and falsehood built by David's family. Clara Hathaway, successful entrepreneur, and the city's main donor. All eyes immediately focused toward the grand stage. The soft music changed to a majestic tone, and slow, yet confident footsteps were heard approaching. From the back of the room, Clara stepped forward gracefully. Her long gown, colored a soft champagne, sparkled under the crystal chandelier. Her hair was styled neatly in waves, revealing her elegant neck. Lily walked beside her, wearing an elegant black mini dress, radiating an equally captivating aura. The guests whispered, "That's her, the successful entrepreneur. So beautiful. Who would have thought a woman that young could be the main donor? Her name is Clara Hathaway. Sounds familiar, huh?" Those whispers spread quickly, turning the initially boisterous atmosphere into a quiet and tense one. At the front table, David's face paled. Cold sweat dripped from his temples. He tried to smile as if unaffected, but his hand gripping the glass trembled violently. Margaret, who earlier sat with her chest puffed out and chin raised high, now looked flustered. Her eyes stared sharply toward the stage as if she couldn't believe her sight. Chloe stared at Clara without blinking. That face, that smile, that sharp gaze she once knew so well, but now everything looked different. There was strength, assertiveness, and an authority she had never seen before. "Impossible," Chloe muttered softly. "That's Clara." Clara walked up the stage stairs, accepting the microphone from the host with a gentle yet authoritative smile. She looked at the whole room, and for a few seconds, her gaze fell exactly towards David and his family. The gaze was sharp but calm. In an instant, David's chest felt like it was hit by something heavy. He looked down, unable to return the gaze. "Thank you for the welcome tonight," said Clara. Her voice was calm yet firm, echoing throughout the room. "Tonight is not just about luxury, but about struggle and the courage to rise from wounds that once destroyed us." That sentence seemed to hold a hidden meaning. Some guests applauded, but at the front table, the atmosphere grew hotter. Clara continued, "I believe everyone has a past. Some are dark, some are bitter. But what matters is how we stand up again, not how hard we fall." News cameras focused on Clara's face, radiating extraordinary calmness. The big screen behind the stage displayed a brief profile of her. Photos from the grand opening of her corporate branches, charity events, and several major projects she built in the city. The name Clara Hathaway was displayed clearly with the title CEO of Clara Group, owner of the Grand Heritage Hotel. The hotel they were standing in that night belonged to Clara herself. A small rumble was heard among the guests. So this hotel belongs to her? That means she's not a guest, but the owner. David was astounded. He looked around, trying to find air. His heart beat wildly out of rhythm. Meanwhile, Margaret bit her lip hard, unable to believe the reality that the woman they once insulted, kicked out, and underestimated, was now standing on stage as the host. Clara looked directly at them from the stage. A thin smile formed on her lips. She looked down slightly, then looked at the cameras with a serene yet piercing gaze. I also want to thank my past for teaching me the meaning of resilience. Without wounds, I wouldn't have strength. Without loss, I wouldn't know how to appreciate happiness, she said. Lily, standing behind her, looked at her mother proudly. She knew every word had a meaning. She knew tonight wasn't just about awards, but about vindication. Applause thundered. All the guests stood up to pay respect to Clara. However, from the front table, David could only look down. Chloe looked at him, her eyes starting to well up. Margaret was right. That's Clara, she whispered, trembling. Margaret closed her eyes, holding back shame and anger mixed into one. Oh my God, that woman really came back. After the speech was over, Clara stepped down from the stage with steady steps. She paused briefly near the front table, looking straight at the family. Enjoy the event, she said flatly. However, the smile she gave made David unable to answer a single word. Chloe could only remain silent, watching Clara walk away with her head held high. In her heart, she began to feel something strange, a guilt that was slowly growing. Meanwhile, Margaret was still looking down. Her face was as stiff as a statue. Everyone was now whispering about them. The names David and Margaret began to be mentioned quietly, linked to Clara's past that once circulated in their circles. Lily glanced at them briefly with a small smile. Look, Mom, karma sometimes comes in an elegant form, not a shout. Clara just smiled faintly. We don't need to retaliate with hate, sweetie. Just show them who we are now. And that night, without needing harsh revenge, Clara had already won everything. Her honor, dignity, and elegance. However, deep down, she knew the game had just begun. Because that family wouldn't necessarily stand by watching the glory of the woman they once trampled on. But Clara was ready. She was no longer the weak woman crying at the door of her mother-in-law's house. She was a woman born from wounds and risen with a strength that not even revenge could knock down. The spotlight highlighted Clara's softly glowing face under the sparkle of the crystal chandelier. Lily stood beside her, holding her mother's hand proudly. The aura of the two radiated an elegance and strength that couldn't be ignored by anyone in the room. Clara's voice began to be heard, slow, soft, but carrying a vibration that touched the heart. A few years ago, I stood at a very low point in my life, she said softly. I was once insulted, degraded, even laughed at, just because I had nothing. All the guests fell silent. No one dared to whisper this time. Clara's words changed the atmosphere to something melancholic and deep. I once fought alone, wiping away tears at night while asking myself, do I still deserve to keep moving forward? When the world closed its doors, I learned to knock on them myself. When everyone left, I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. Lily looked at her mother with teary eyes. She knew every sentence wasn't just a story. It was a real wound she witnessed back when her mother worked hard to raise her without anyone's help. And I realized, continued Clara with a gentle smile, that sometimes God places us in the darkest point not to punish, but to show how strong the light we have inside us is. Some guests started looking down, wiping away tears. Small sobs were heard from the back rows. David sat frozen. He stared at Clara, who spoke with full authority, and his chest felt tight. Every word Clara spoke was like a knife, slowly piercing his conscience. He knew those sentences were directed at someone who had the heart to abandon her in a weak state. Margaret gripped her handbag tightly. Her fingers trembled. Her heart shook violently, realizing everything she once underestimated now stood on the stage of honor. Not as a victim, but as an inspiration to many. Chloe stared at Clara with a look of disbelief. Deep down in her heart, there was a sense of awe she couldn't deny. The woman she once thought was weak, and not on her level, now looked like an angel born from embers. Clara looked out at the audience with a meaningful gaze. I once worked in a simple place, considered low, considered inappropriate, even alienated just because I wasn't on their level. But I wasn't angry. I didn't retaliate with hate. I just tried to prove that self-worth is not measured by wealth, but by how strong we endure when the world wants to bring us down. The grand room was now dead silent. Only Clara's voice echoed. She continued in a gentle but firm tone. A woman's struggle is not about seeking validation, but about finding the courage to love herself, even when she's been hurt. Lily gripped her mother's hand tighter. Her tears slowly fell, not from sadness, but from pride. She knew her mother wasn't just speaking. Her mother was channeling all the wounds of the past into the strength to inspire many people. On the big screen behind the stage, the committee displayed portraits of Clara's struggle. Her opening a small boutique, working until late at night, then photos of when she successfully inaugurated her business branches, one by one. All of that made the guests even more amazed. Clara gave a small smile, then looked down for a moment. And now I stand here not to show who I am now, but to remind everyone that anyone can rise. No matter how many times you are knocked down, underestimated, or abandoned, the room roared again with long applause. Several guests stood, giving her a standing ovation. However, from the front table, only 3 people remained seated frozen: David, Margaret, and Chloe. David's face tensed. In his mind, voices of the past echoed. The days when he joined in mocking, when he let his mother kick Clara out without defending her, and when he turned away for the sake of prestige. Now, all of that hit him back, in the form of unbearable shame. Margaret looked down deeply. Her face was bright red. Every word Clara spoke was like a whip to her pride and arrogance. She used to often say that Clara was just a burden to her son, that a woman like that would never succeed. Now, all her talk was shattered in one night. Chloe tried to calm herself, but her restlessness couldn't be hidden. She could feel the eyes of the other guests starting to look towards their table, as if beginning to connect who David's family really was. Meanwhile, Clara looked at Lily with a moved smile. She stroked her daughter's head, then spoke softly into the microphone. And I dedicate all of this to my daughter, Lily, because from her I learned the meaning of patience, the meaning of unconditional love, and the meaning of courage to never give up. Lily looked down, tears streaming down her cheeks. She hugged her mother gently in front of everyone. The atmosphere became very emotional. Some female guests even stood and applauded with wet eyes. They didn't just see a successful entrepreneur on stage, but also a tough mother who went through the hell of life with her head held high. Clara ended her speech with a sentence that made the entire room instantly quiet. For me, the best revenge is not hatred, but showing that I can be happy without having to bring anyone down. Silence. A few seconds later, the applause thundered louder than before. Everyone stood up. Some even cheered with encouragement. David looked down deeply. His face reddened. Margaret closed her eyes, holding back tears that almost fell due to shame. Chloe took a long sigh, looking at Clara with a look full of a regret that had just started to grow in her heart. Clara looked around the room, then gave a calm smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she walked down from the stage with Lily at her side. Their steps were so calm and authoritative. Every step left a trail of respect from the people who looked at them with awe. And without needing to mention anyone's name, Clara had slapped her past in the most elegant way, with success, wisdom, and sincerity that made everyone realize that the woman who is hurt doesn't always lose. Sometimes they just wait for the time to rise in a far more beautiful way. The atmosphere in the grand hall drastically changed. The sparkling lights that previously reflected beautifully now felt like a judging glare. The applause that remained slowly faded, replaced by small whispers among the guests. All eyes were directed at one point, the table where David, Margaret, and Chloe sat. Margaret couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Her hands trembled, her mouth opened as if wanting to say something, but what came out was only a soft sob. She looked down deeply. Her face was wet with tears and a shame that suffocated her chest. "Oh God, what have I done?" she muttered softly. Her voice trembled amidst her breaking sobs. Her memory spun quickly, displaying all the cruelty of the past. When she kicked Clara out of the house, saying, "You are a nobody anymore. Get out of this house." When she closed the door in her daughter-in-law's face without giving her a chance to speak. When she smiled in satisfaction as David demanded the divorce with a loud voice. Now, all those scenes slapped back her conscience. And what was more painful, everyone witnessed how the woman she insulted now stood at the peak of success. Not with revenge, but with nobility of heart. David sat rigidly beside her. His tears fell soundlessly. He always used to feel he was right. He thought his decision to leave Clara was a step to chase happiness and prestige. But tonight, that prestige was shattered to pieces. He stared at the empty stage where Clara stood earlier, as if hoping time could rewind. "I'm a fool," he whispered softly. "I'm a complete fool." Clara, who now stood at the side of the hall surrounded by the committee and guests of honor, only glanced briefly at them. Her smile was calm, her eyes soft, but full of meaning. She didn't try to approach, nor did she look with hatred. Because for Clara, the old wounds had already been buried along with the tears of struggle that dried up in the past. Lily, who was still hugging her mother, looked at Clara's face with pride. "Mom is so amazing," she said softly. "Lily loves Mom." Clara looked down, hugging her daughter tightly. "Mom loves Lily too. If it weren't for you, Mom wouldn't be this strong." Several guests approached to shake Clara's hand in awe. Some asked for photos, some shook her hand with teary eyes, saying, "You are truly an inspiration to us all." Clara just smiled friendly, remaining humble even though now all attention was on her. Meanwhile, at the front table, Margaret couldn't bear to look at anyone. She covered her face with a handkerchief, enduring the shame that burned her entire body. "David," she said haltingly, "I am so ashamed. I used to be so cruel to Clara, and look at her now. I don't even deserve to look at her." David took a long sigh. He wanted to speak, but his voice was caught. All he could do was stare at the floor, as if that was where all his mistakes settled. He realized tonight wasn't just Clara proving something, but also God showing that someone's patience will never be in vain. Chloe, on the other hand, stared blankly toward the stage. Her beautiful face, full of makeup, now looked pale. She remembered how she proudly stole David, looking at Clara with a cynical smile at the office when she first found out who David's wife really was. But tonight, all her confidence crumbled. She tried to smile to cover her restlessness, but in her heart, there was an inexplicable feeling between jealousy, fear, and regret. She realized that no matter how luxuriously she dressed up, she could never match the light radiating from Clara's sincerity. One of the committee members approached Clara for a group photo with the award recipients. When she stood in the middle of the stage for the photo session, David spontaneously stood up from his chair. He walked slowly toward the stage. His steps were heavy, but his eyes were fixed on one point: Clara. All eyes again followed his movement. Chloe watched nervously, while Margaret held her chest, afraid to face reality. David stopped a few yards from Clara. "Clara," he called softly. That voice was barely audible, but enough to make everyone turn. Clara looked at him briefly with a neutral expression. "Congratulations, Clara," David continued. His eyes welled with tears. "You made it. I am proud." Clara gave a small nod. "Thank you, David. But you don't need to direct that pride at me. Just use it as a lesson." David swallowed hard. His chest felt tight. "I regret it. I was wrong." Clara looked at him calmly. "It's fine. Everyone has the right to be wrong. But not everyone learns from their mistakes. I hope you are among those willing to learn." That remark slapped David softly but deeply. There was no hatred in Clara's tone. Instead, there was a maturity that made David feel even smaller. Margaret, who had been holding back sobs, suddenly stood up and limped toward Clara. "Clara, please forgive me," she said brokenly while holding her chest. "I was too arrogant. I didn't know you were this strong. I regret insulting you, kicking you out, and hurting you. Please forgive me." All the guests fell silent again. Some cameras even stopped recording because the scene was too emotional. Clara looked at the woman she once feared so much. She took a deep breath, then stepped closer. "Margaret," she said gently, "I forgave you a long time ago. There is nothing left to regret. It has all become a part of my life's journey." Margaret cried uncontrollably, hugging Clara without being able to say anything. Clara returned the hug slowly. "Thank you, my dear," Margaret whispered with a hoarse voice. "You truly are a woman with a noble heart." Lily, who watched the incident, just hugged her mother's leg, joining in, shedding tears. A few guests were also swept away by the emotion, shedding tears of joy. After a few moments, Clara slowly released the hug. She looked at David and said gently, "Take good care of your wife. Don't repeat the same mistakes, because once you lose someone who is sincere, no one can replace them." David looked down. Those words hit him hard, making him truly realize how meaningful someone he once threw away was. Chloe could only look down, unable to meet Clara's eyes. Clara then took Lily's hand and walked away, leaving the hall. Every step was accompanied by admiring glances and respect. She walked with her head held high, as if every wound that once scratched her had now turned into wings of pride. Meanwhile, behind her, David could only watch the woman's back getting further away. He realized that night was not just about awards. That night was an affirmation that sincere love cannot be bought with prestige, and dignity maintained with patience will eventually shine on its own. Lily looked at her mother while smiling. Mom is so cool. Everyone admires Mom." Clara looked at her child gently. "Mom doesn't want people's admiration, sweetie. Mom just wants you to know that life shouldn't stop even when other people underestimate us." And that night, the sky above the hotel looked bright, as if it too gave light to the steps of a woman who was once trampled on but never defeated. She was no longer the Clara who used to be kicked out without dignity. Now she was Clara Hathaway, a woman who won in the most beautiful way, silencing the past with success and kindness of heart. After the event was over, the atmosphere in the hall slowly quieted down. The guests had started leaving, but their gazes still occasionally directed at one point, towards Clara, who stood at the side of the room, still chatting with some committee members and guests of honor. The soft light from the hotel chandelier reflected a golden glint on her elegant gown, adding to the calm aura she radiated that night. However, among that crowd, two figures walked slowly with heavy steps, David and Margaret. Their faces looked shattered, not from anger, but from a guilt that suffocated their chests. Margaret's eyes were swollen, her lips trembled, and her steps were no longer as firm as before. David, beside her, looked down with a face full of regret, while his fingers kept gripping the wet handkerchief that he hadn't let go of. Clara turned when she heard their footsteps. Her eyes looked calm, not rejecting, but also not showing familiarity. There was only an indescribable shade of peace, a wisdom born from wounds healed by time. Margaret stopped in front of Clara, and without being able to hold back her emotions, she immediately fell to her knees. Her hands reached for the hem of Clara's gown. Her eyes pleaded. "Clara, forgive me," she said, in tears. Her tears flowed heavily. "I was blind. I was arrogant. I was cruel. I am so sorry, sweetheart. Truly sorry." David also fell to his knees beside his mother. He bowed his head deeply. His voice was barely audible when he said, "Clara, I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but please let me apologize. I was wrong to leave you. I was wrong to break your heart. I was wrong to choose someone who doesn't know the meaning of sincerity." A few guests who hadn't left held their breath seeing that scene. A mother-in-law who was once arrogant now bowed before her daughter-in-law, and a husband who was once heartless now completely humbled himself. However, Clara remained silent. She was not in a rush to respond, nor did she try to pull away. She looked at the two of them for a long time, holding back the emotion that began to tighten her chest. Lily, standing beside her, gripped her mother's hand, confused seeing the incident. "Mom," Lily whispered softly, "why are they crying like that?" Clara gently stroked her daughter's head, then looked towards David and Margaret. "Please get up, Margaret, David," she said softly. Her voice was calm yet authoritative. Margaret shook her head hard. No, Clara, I don't deserve to stand before you. I was too evil. Clara took a long breath. Margaret, I don't want to see anyone kneeling before me. I used to be in the lowest position, and I know how it feels to be humiliated. But God has been fair enough in repaying everything in His own way. Now is not the time to hurt each other, but to learn from the past. Clara's voice was so gentle but pierced the heart. Margaret looked at her, her body trembling, holding back sobs. You truly have the heart of an angel, sweetheart. I don't know what else to say. Clara looked at her deeply. I am only human, Margaret, just like you. The difference is maybe I used to cry too often, but those tears made me strong. David looked at Clara's face, his eyes swollen. Clara, I know I've lost everything, but let me ask for one thing. Even if you don't want to speak to me again, I want you to know I am truly sorry. I want to be a better father for Lily, even though I know I'm not worthy. Clara looked at him for a moment. There was a flash of pain in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by calmness. David, she said softly, I used to pray that you would realize, but it turns out God chose another way. I don't hate you. I also don't hold grudges. But we already have our own paths. And as for Lily, I will always protect her. She doesn't need to know our wounds. It's enough that she grows up with pure love. David looked down further. His chest was tight with an unstoppable guilt. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for still being able to say that after everything I did. Clara smiled a little. I am not speaking to show kindness. I just want my life to no longer be shadowed by hatred, because holding a grudge will only shatter the heart further. Clara, I don't have much time left. If you are willing, let me fix everything. Let me make up for these mistakes. Clara shook her head slowly. No need, Margaret. I have been forgiven by God because I never had malicious intent, and I have forgiven you as well. We all have a past, but let tonight be the end of all that hatred. A brief silence enveloped them. The air in the hall felt warm, no longer suffocating. Everyone watching seemed to know that that night was not just a meeting, but a spiritual redemption that had been buried for so long. Lily looked at her mother, then whispered, Mom is so nice. Mom isn't mad at them. Clara smiled, looking at her daughter. No, sweetie, because being angry won't make Mom happy. Forgiveness actually brings peace to the heart. Margaret could no longer hold back her tears. She looked down and bowed again. This time, not out of shame, but out of genuine respect and admiration. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for opening my eyes. You're right. God repays in the gentlest but most striking way. I will never forget this lesson. Clara slowly held Margaret's shoulders, asking her to stand up. Enough, Margaret. Let's stand. We have all learned a lot. Let the past stay where it belongs. David also stood up. His face was full of emotion. He looked at Clara one last time before saying, May you always be happy, Clara. I pray that God protects you and Lily. Clara looked at him briefly, then nodded slowly. And I also pray that you learn to appreciate those who truly love you. David, don't repeat the same mistakes with someone else. Those words closed their meeting that night. There was no anger, no revenge, only a silence holding 1,000 meanings. Clara took Lily's hand and walked out of the hall. Outside, the night breeze blew gently, carrying a peaceful aroma that was so soothing. Lily looked at the starry sky and gave a small smile. Mom, look, there are so many stars tonight. Clara looked up, her smile widening. Yes, sweetie. Maybe God is giving us a sign that everyone who is patient will definitely shine when the time comes. That night, Clara's steps were steady, leaving the past. She no longer looked back because everything that needed to be resolved had been settled in the most beautiful way. Without revenge, without anger, only with wisdom and sincere love. And back there, Margaret and David stood silently, staring at Clara's back, slowly moving away, realizing that they had just witnessed a greatness of heart they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Clara's days were now filled with a different meaning. She was no longer a woman busy proving herself to the world, but a woman who wanted to be a light for others. Every morning before going to her foundation's office, she always made time for breakfast with Lily. That simple moment became an irreplaceable happiness. The foundation she established was named the Guiding Light Foundation, inspired by her life journey of once hitting rock bottom but rising with the light of hope. The foundation was dedicated to helping women who lost their way after a divorce, being abandoned, or neglected. She provided sewing training, handicrafts, and mental health counseling. Many women who initially came with swollen, teary eyes now smiled proudly, carrying their own creations. Every time Clara stood before them, she saw her past self, fragile, lost, yet possessing the spirit to survive. "You are all strong," she said one day during a training session. "Don't let the past determine your self-worth. God gives us wounds so we learn to be stronger, not so we fall apart." Lily, who was now growing into a teenager, often accompanied her mother. She helped design pamphlets, write posts on the foundation's social media, and occasionally photographed their activities. "I want to be like Mom later," she said with sparkling eyes. "I want to help a lot of people too." Clara looked at her child with a moved smile. "You will be even greater than Mom, kiddo, because you learn from the same wounds and love." One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Clara stood on the balcony of her house. The soft wind greeted her face, bringing memories of the past that were no longer painful. She remembered the nights full of tears in the old rented house, when she was only accompanied by little Lily and a rusty old sewing machine.